Good morning. Today is Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, and this is the New Hampshire House of Representatives Municipal and County Government Committee. I am Representative Diane Power. The committee is convened today for the purpose of hearing eight Senate bills. We have no substitutes today, so I don't need to welcome any subs. And at this time, I would ask that you would silence your cell phones and please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Representative Guthrie.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So for the committee members, what I plan to do here today is to work through the bill hearings as scheduled. And I hope to conclude our hearings between the noon and 1 p.m. hour. And if we see that we are not running according to schedule, then at that time I will confer with the ranking member and decide about taking a lunch break and then returning to finish up our publicly noticed work for the day. So at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 439 relative to municipal data center zoning. And the chair would like to welcome the prime sponsor, Representative Altschiller, to introduce her bill to us today. Good morning, did I say representative? I meant to say senator. Okay.
All right. I used to be in
Yep.
the House of Representatives. So.
Welcome, Senator
Thank you.
Altschiller. So yours is the first Senate bill of the year, and I'm on the autopilot of welcoming representatives, so I apologize.
Well, I'm honored to be the first. Thank you, Chairwoman Parr and honorable committee members. For the record, my name is Deborah Altschiller. I am the state senator for District 24, representing the towns of Exeter, Stratham, Greenland, Rye, Hampton, Northampton, and Hampton Falls. I introduced Senate Bill 439 because New Hampshire municipalities deserve tools, not just the appearance of tools, to manage one of the fastest growing and most disruptive forms of industrial development in the country. The Senate amendment, which you have before you, I hope you have both, but the amended bill stripped away those tools, and what remains is a shell. And let me be direct about what was removed and why it matters. The original bill limited data center exemptions to facilities occupying no more than 10% of on-site gross floor area. The amendment inflated that threshold to 25%. That is not just a technical adjustment, it's a significant expansion of the exemption that could allow substantial data center operations to sidestep local oversight completely. But the more consequential deletions are what the amendment removed wholesale. Gone is the requirement that utilities confirm adequate electrical capacity before a project is approved. Gone are the noise protections for residents near these facilities. Gone are the design and siting standards, the landscape buffers, the setbacks, the sidewalks, the architectural variation requirements. Gone is the transit buffer zone protecting transit-oriented development from displacement. And what remains is a single sentence. Data centers are allowed in commercial and industrial zones subject to whatever local regulations happen to exist now. So that is not a framework, that's an abdication. And here's why those provisions were not bureaucratic extras, they were the bill. The Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory projects that data center electricity consumption will rise from 176 terawatt hours in 2023 to between 325 and 580 terawatt hours by 2028. That's just 2 years away, potentially doubling or tripling their share of a U.S. electricity consumption. And without utility confirmation requirements, New Hampshire municipalities will have no mechanism to know whether the grid can handle a proposed facility before it is built. That's not consumer protection, that's speculation at the public's expense. We have also seen, since the time I introduced this bill and the time it's coming to you, we have seen data centers move into locations with open arms into other states. And we would like a little taste of that, to be honest with you. However, what's happening is that the grid, the amount of energy they need to operate is now forcing them into creating infrastructure with their local electric providers. And where the electrical grid cannot handle what the data center wants to do, the electric providers are offering upgrades. And they are doing this at little to no cost to the data centers in the form of loans, which then get turned around and restructured onto the ratepayers. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen here. And it is because there was no framework in order to do this kind of regulation. All we want to do is put in a framework so our local towns can decide, A, do they want to do this? And B, can this industry that they're welcoming into their town handle their own business? Or are they going to put it off onto the local taxpayers and ratepayers? Additionally, the noise preventions were essential. In Granbury, Texas, Earth Justice documented over 24 individuals suffering direct health impacts from crypto mining data noise, including permanent hearing loss, severe migraines, tinnitus, and debilitating vertigo. These aren't hypothetical harms. They are what happens when communities have no enforceable standards before a facility opens. The original bill's requirement for professional acoustical study before site plan approval is precisely how you prevent Granbury from happening in Exeter or Hampton. Opponents of protective regulation will always argue that rules drive away investment. But the evidence says otherwise. Data Center Watch found that community opposition has blocked $18 billion and delayed $46 billion in U.S. data center projects since mid-2024, with project cancellations accelerating from 2 in 2023 to 25 in 2025. At least 142 grassroots organizations are now actively opposing data center projects across 28 states. And what drives these projects off the rails is not thoughtful regulation, it's the absence of it. When communities feel blindsided, they fight back. When they have a seat at the table with real protections encoded in law, they're partners and projects get built. This is happening in Virginia. In Goodyear and Buckeye, Arizona, the $14 billion data center project was withdrawn in May of 2024 after residents organized against it over noise pollution, building height, and grid strain concerns, all things addressed in the original bill. The developer came back with community engagement and clearer standards. That's not regulation killing development, and that is regulation doing its job, a $14 billion project that was able to finally go forward. The amended bill does not give municipalities tools. It gives them permission to think about tools someday if they get around to it. Meanwhile, developers can move, acquire, and build before communities even understand what they are facing. In 2023 and 2024, data centers routinely acquired land and obtained approvals without public scrutiny, often obscured by non-disclosure agreements. The original Senate Bill 439 was designed to end that dynamic in New Hampshire, and the amendment that sits before you restores it. Zoning in New Hampshire is local, local, local. You will not find a bigger proponent of local control of zoning regulations than this senator. We do it in New Hampshire it's meaningful because it establishes a floor. We do it for wetlands, we do it for floodplains, we do it for telecommunications facilities. We should do it for the fastest growing category of electricity consuming industrial infrastructure in the country. The original Senate Bill 439 was a balanced, evidence-based bill. It protected residents without prohibiting development. It gave developers certainty and gave communities standing. The amendment leaves both without either. And I urge this committee to restore the original bill's provisions, or at a minimum, restore the utility confirmation requirement and the noise standards. New Hampshire communities are watching what we do with this, and so are the developers. The message we should send is that the Granite State welcomes responsible investment, not a race to the bottom. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, and also draw your attention to page 4 of my testimony packet, which has all of the referenced materials in my testimony, so that you can read about how data centers are developing in other states, and how some of the issues that I talked about the push and pull of development and community responsibility are handled in other states, and how they're doing it right.
Thank you, Senator. Are
Thank
there
you.
questions for Senator Altshuler? Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. So you mentioned in your original bill that you had check-ins with utilities to make sure there was enough capacity or what they were going to do to handle that. A lot of residents are on wells, and knowing what I've read about data centers, there's also concern about water and the quality of water, and are they really closed loop systems, or are they contaminating water systems? Was there anything in your original bill that addressed water concerns?
To be honest with you, it was not mentioned directly in the original bill. A legislative body could permit an establishment of a data center within zoning districts designated for commercial or industrial use. So I think it's assumed, and if we go digging into those RSAs, that water is addressed in that zoning designation.
Further questions? I have a follow. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to ask this question. So, Senator Altshuler,
Yes.
I'm not sure that committee members understand how the use of water as it pertains to data centers. Could you explain to the committee, for our edification, how the water contamination and water is used? Are you familiar with that?
So I didn't address that particularly in this bill because this bill specifically creates a special zoning, an option for that zoning within a town or a city where they already have industrial or commercial. So if a town has zoned industrial or commercial, the water issues are covered under that. So before it goes forward, you wouldn't be applying to put a data center in like agricultural or mixed, or that kind of mixed use, or a mixed use commercial residential, just in the development areas. Sorry. Yeah. So
Okay.
water is addressed prior to it ever getting to the planning board
With regards to the zoning?
with regards to zoning.
Okay, thank you. Representative Stavis is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. In the original bill, was the fact that there are many residential areas within commercial and industrial zoning zones cited? and that the electricity issue, the water issue, especially the noise issue, would have an enormous impact on those residential areas within commercial and industrial zones. And not only that, but when an application is received by a planning board, the question is regularly asked, does it have regional impact? For those of us who live on rivers, other major bodies of water, it certainly would have regional impact. Does the original bill address regional impact? And does the original bill acknowledge that there are residential areas within industrial and commercial zoning areas?
Regional impact is not addressed directly. I wish I brought copies of the original, but I think you may have it in your files. But nonetheless, in approving a zoning authority to permit data centers, this is something that a town would have to adopt on its own. And then after the legislature gives permission for this particular type of zoning, and then the local legislative body may permit, thank you, the establishment of data centers subject to the provisions of this particular subdivision for local land use. And it addresses how close it could be to a railway station or any other high-capacity transit. It addresses the electrical impact on the grid, and that the data center would have to demonstrate to the town that they have a plan for the amount of energy that they need, and then it would not have the regional impact on the ratepayers. And that has to be 2 years out, planned 2 years out. The original bill did address the regional impact without saying regional impact of noise levels that are generated within 300 feet of a residential district. So residential district are mentioned, and it has ambient noise levels at the property line of the nearest residentially zoned parcel by 5%. So, and that noise study has to be done by a qualified acoustical engineer. It can't just be, somebody who has sound equipment who lives in town. So, and then it does go on for design and siting standards for mechanical and electrical equipment, including but not limited to transformers and generators. So, this is all very specified within the bill. And it's all gone, this regulatory framework, and it is just a regulatory framework, which a town doesn't have to adopt this. They can just plow on forward. Now, they're opening themselves up to a lot of lawsuits, possibly from their citizens, and it's not a good way to build consensus within a community. But that hasn't stopped some towns before. But we want to give towns the framework to be able to be partners with data centers if they want to welcome that into their town, into their commercial base.
Further questions? Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question, Senator. How do other states define a data center, and how do we make sure that we are defining it in a way that doesn't cause exclusion for storing of data on servers that is done by companies?
Sure. So within the bill, a data center means a facility used primarily for the storage, processing, management, and transmission of digital data. It does not include a facility that exceeds 20%, well, now 25% of the gross floor area. So that would not be a company storing its own data. What we looked to in developing this legislation, it was not all, like, I have a great idea. There are actually states who are doing this well, and some who are struggling through this process. And one of the states that's doing it very well is Virginia. And because they put forward a regulatory framework, so there's something to work within. Everybody's not making it up as they go along. There are some states that are struggling right now, having welcomed in a very large data center project or two. Tennessee is one of them, and they are struggling through having not put in the framework, or at least not a comprehensive framework that allows the local municipalities and the state to work with that data center after land has been acquired, buildings have gone up. We don't want to get to the land is acquired, buildings are up, this thing is going online, and oh my gosh, nobody thought about noise. Oh my gosh, nobody thought about what the impact is going to be on our electrical grid. These are things we actually have to address, particularly if we want to welcome in a new type of business into our state. And we have places in this state that would welcome this, that have the space. And so let's give those cities and towns the tools to be able to negotiate fairly and make a space for these businesses so that both the business and the town are winners.
I have a follow-up to that
Yes,
topic area. So I think we all can agree that this is a very important and very complex policy area,
Yes.
and it's important to get it right for the Granite Staters. So I understand that the evolution of the bill, what we have before us as it came from the Senate, is different. So in your response to the representative, you said that Virginia is a model and is doing this right. And my question
One of the models, yeah.
Yes. My question, and I'm curious to know, with regards to the policy, model policy, if you will,
Yes.
in Virginia, is this at the state level or is this more at a particular local level?
Both.
At both?
Both.
Okay.
So their state doesn't operate in the same way that ours creates at the legislative level the opportunity for cities and towns to adopt. Like, we set zoning here, and so if we come up with a new zoning category, that's available for cities and towns to use. If we don't set one, then we default to what we actually have, and what we actually have now isn't sufficient for this type of business. This is a new kind of business that has stressors that are not stressors on the local quality of life and energy consumption that we have not seen in any other type of business before.
So I have a follow-up to my own question here.
Yes.
And that is, in having looked at and analyzed both your original bill as filed and what we have here that came over from the Senate, my concern is, and hopefully you can speak to this, so I hear you saying we need a framework at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is with regards to, and this is what I'm hearing, and help me if I misunderstand, is that my concern as being on this policy committee is that the lion's share of what is adopted locally will be local decisions. And my concern is that then we're going to have a patchwork of local ordinances as it pertains to data centers. Whereas in order to protect the people of New Hampshire better, I feel like there needs to be a more substantive framework at the state level. So could you speak to that? Because from my reading, and it's my opinion, that I think neither version of the bill does that to the degree that we would need that, that I would like to see. So could you kind of speak to that? And
So I think I'm following. I'm following you here. If I understand what you're asking, given the unique nature of a data center as a business looking for space to operate within the state of New Hampshire, without any framework at all, it's free for all, and then it becomes real local problems. but at the state level, the bill that I have introduced, that first came out, are you saying it's not tight enough? Like there needs to be a little bit more?
That would be my
Got it.
personal assessment.
Yes.
And also, I did do some research and ask questions of
Yeah.
people that operate across the country. And I was told that this is like cutting edge policy. No other states have done this. This is what I was told. So there's no real model policy or state law for us to look at. So I'm trying to get all my data points. I
Sure.
will trust but verify, listen to the input here.
Sure. So in crafting this legislation, because this is a new frontier business-wise, there are some states that are doing it, in my opinion, are very progressive about looking at what this kind of business is, recognizing the needs that they have for their state and the stressors that it may put on a local community or economy, particularly with regards to energy, and are putting some frameworks in place. Like I said, Virginia. I leaned a lot on what Virginia is doing because they have some of the most data centers in the country, and some of the fewest lawsuits about those data centers. So then we look to some of the places where the data center is moving into a particular community. We're having struggles, which brought me to, in my testimony, Granbury. So when you look at the on the noted citations line, citation number 2. So Granbury was struggling significantly with noise pollution. They had not put any framework in place whatsoever. And so now they're chasing after the fact. And then then I looked to, okay, if you look at data at citation number 3, the $64 billion backlash, how community opposition became data centers' biggest financial risk. Community opposition blocked $18 billion and delayed $46 billion in data center projects. That's a nightmare. That's an absolute nightmare for a city, town, a state to be, have invested and possibly wooed a company to come here and put in an $18 billion project, only to have the local communities not heard, not at the table, not have any framework whatsoever, and launch delays, years-long delays for investment, right? And communities should be at the table. So in order to put us in a space where communities have a seat at the table, where we are thinking about some of the highest impact spaces that data centers bring to a community, which is mostly in energy consumption and noise, and its proximity to railways, which is, not as huge a concern in New Hampshire as it is in some other states, but a concern nonetheless. I took those data points, like where are the places where it's delaying projects? Why is it delaying the projects? And what kind of framework would have, if a state had that in place, how could they have met those objections and possibly modified a project to a place where a community would be everybody there for the ribbon cutting versus everybody at the courthouse for the filing? We want to be at the ribbon cutting. We want to set up a framework so we can welcome this kind of business into the state responsibly.
Representative Davis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking yet another question.
Sure.
So the state of Oregon had just last month enacted a 1-year moratorium on all data centers and established a task force study committee to look at all of the issues that data centers present, not just to communities, but to the state, to regions within the state. My concern, certainly with this amended version of the bill, which provides no protection for communities whatsoever and even less for the state, is that this is an issue that transcends municipal boundaries. This is an issue that is truly of statewide concern. New Hampshire is not a large enough state to accommodate the kinds of data mining centers. And also, data centers and data mining centers are two distinct and different things. And one of my concerns with the amended version of the bill, and I'm not looking at the original, so my apologies for that, is that in Lebanon, for example, we have data centers that are affiliated with Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, data centers that are affiliated with Dartmouth College. They're fairly large buildings and they house servers that provide data to those organizations. In the language of this bill, I'm not sure that those existing and already approved data centers would then have to come again before the planning department for a special exception, because they're not technically what the bill talks about. There's something different. So I guess my last question is, would you welcome a larger kind of effort that involves House, Senate, bipartisan effort to encourage a statewide study and to look at what the differences are, what are the potential impacts, what are some of the rules and regulations that we may want to adopt, as opposed to just saying to municipalities, it's your problem now.
Right. So, so there's a delicate balance in New Hampshire always between saying to a municipality, it's your problem now, versus it's your decision to make, right? So municipalities need to have the local control to make decisions that are right for their towns. It's our responsibility at the state level to give those towns the tools that they need to do it. So in my opinion, the basic framework, like a framework that doesn't exist right now, that addresses some of the most high impact issues that are seen around the country as being deterrents to doing this, which are electricity consumption, noise, and proximity to rail. Those are some of the very biggest things that cause these lawsuits. So if we were to put in a basic framework and then additionally put a task force together to study how it is evolving, because the industry itself is not static. It's evolving even faster. As a matter of fact, I left my, I'm supposed to be in education right now, but I left education to drive over here, and on my way, I have NHPR just like on the radio, and there's only time for one story because it's a quick drive, but it was about data centers. So this is what we are talking about right now. This is an industry that is going to be driving a lot of how businesses, schools, and towns do their work, particularly as we integrate AI. And without management of the data centers themselves, and putting some parameters, which in my opinion, I suggested 10% of the gross floor area of all on-site buildings. I think that without any parameters and just studying it for a couple of years, we're losing ground. I would prefer, if the committee is open to it, to an amendment that brings back the original parameters and perhaps adding on a study committee to go along with it. But I think doing nothing and waiting for a study committee is putting us behind the eight ball.
Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. And maybe a little bit of a piggyback on what Representative Stavis just asked, but it's specific to one word in both the original and the amended, and it is the suggestion, or it is rulemaking. Both bills say that both bills say that the data center would be, subject to local regulations. But that section almost seems duplicative to say that the planning board and the legislative body can create rules, but rulemaking is a specific thing that's defined by statute for government agencies. I think it's RSA 500 and something.
Sure, Joe
So
Carr.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, yeah, Joe, thank you. And so I'm curious why the addition of that word rulemaking, which again seems duplicative of what we would already assume to be our responsibility at the local level.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Majori, for the question. Where in the bill? Can you show me in the,
Absolutely. So
What-
in the original,
Yeah.
it's I'm sorry, I don't have line numbers, but
Oh,
it's at
okay.
the end. It's a suggestion
The
of
end.
adding RSA 674-84 rulemaking. And the language is a little bit different in the amended, but in the amendment, again, at the end, 674-83 rulemaking, and they both say the same thing. The planning board, with the approval of the legislative body, may adopt regulations as necessary. The original expands on that a little bit. But again, it seems like rulemaking is one thing, and what you're suggesting here is already our responsibility. So I'm just curious if I'm missing something, if it's necessary, or if it's duplicative. Does it make any sense?
Sort of, yes. I think I'm following you. And in both the introduced bill and the amended bill, there are spaces in 674 where local legislative bodies can adopt their own regulations in how to implement state rules, as long as they're fidelitous to the rules. So how Northampton would go forward with it might be slightly different than Hampton, as long as there's fidelity to the letter and spirit of the rule. It's a how, not a if. Yeah.
I get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. What is the effect of data centers on railroads? You've mentioned that a few times, and I may have missed the connection.
Yes. So there have been issues with we transport a lot of very dangerous cargo on our railways, and there needs to be a setback so that in the event of a data center fire, it is not within reach of a railway station. A fire in a data center is much more impactful than a fire in a factory.
Thank you. Further
Yeah.
questions? Seeing none. Oh, so Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again. So I have a question about process here.
Certainly.
So we had your original bill, and now we have that bill as amended by the Senate.
Yes.
And I just want to reiterate what I think you're asking us for,
Okay.
which is another amendment, another amended version of this bill that hews closer to the original than this current version does. Am I correct in assuming that?
Correct. The amended bill does not reflect the intention or the spirit of the introduced bill, which has my name on it. So I don't support the amended bill. I think that it reduces the impact. In fact, it makes it, it's window dressing. It doesn't do anything to help us.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Senator Altschuler.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman. And I really appreciate your time and the questions. And this committee clearly does its homework. And I'm going to put the next person up here.
You did well.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice day. Okay. Next, the chair recognizes Representative Damon. Good morning and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good morning. Thank you. Excuse me. I'm State Representative Hope Damon. I represent half of Sullivan County, the towns of Ackworth, Langdon, Leominster, Goshen, Washington, Springfield, Sunapee, Croydon, where I live, and the city of Claremont. Y'all should come. I am a co-sponsor of this legislation. I am going to try to not repeat the thorough testimony and discussion that you've just had with Senator Altschuler. I will, however, express a shared viewpoint that the amended version of the bill does not accomplish any safety net, any protective enabling measures for municipalities in regards to data centers. And I too would prefer that my name not be on that bill, the amended version, and would like and appreciate the committee looking carefully at the original language with possibly some further amendment based on discussion, and I'll note a couple things here. It would be wonderful for New Hampshire to be one of the states that is proactive about addressing these data center concerns. Data centers are going to happen. We need them. They are valuable in our increasingly technological world. We can either do that safely and productively and have them be impactful in a good way to our New Hampshire residents, or we can just wait and see what happens and there will be harms. So to that end, and I'm just going to sort through here a bit to not be repetitive, just want to note that they really have very, very large footprints, both in terms of substantial amounts of land, frankly, staggering amounts of electricity, millions of gallons of water, which is predominantly used for cooling, and they produce noise 24/7. So the impacts of those parts are both on our environment and our human well-being. I would, in fact, emphasize that water needs to be included in the legislation. The impact on water supply, I think, was not adequately stated in either version of the bill. We are having persistent and recurring drought, and there is no reasonable expectation that that issue is going to resolve. So the water supply to existing wells, to existing municipal water sources could be adversely impacted. We need to make sure that whether it's municipal or regional oversight, that proposed data centers are addressing their needs for water in ways that do not adversely impact the existing water requirements of our communities. And the power needs, I think, have been discussed, but I would add to what has been said, it's obvious that if you increase the infrastructure needs, greater amounts of electricity required, much greater demand, someone needs to pay for that infrastructure. And I think putting into statute the opportunity for municipalities or perhaps counties to require the developer of the data center to participate in the funding of that increased infrastructure, rather than leaving the burden to impact our local residential electric costs, I think would be very important to look at. So I think I would just summarize from there that it is a responsible approach to have statute that allows approaching these projects thoughtfully and carefully, using wise regulations and full transparency of responsibilities and impacts. The amended version does not have benefit in my eyes. It doesn't really, other than defining what a data center is, it doesn't add anything to statute that is of benefit. I would respectfully urge the committee to oppose the amended version of the bill, carefully review the original language, consider amending it as has been discussed, particularly including regional impacts and specific consideration of water concerns as part of the regulatory framework that we could utilize, and then move forward without delay. Thank you.
Questions for Representative Damon? Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for taking my question. You mentioned water several times. We've mentioned it here a few times. Where I'm from originally in New York, near the Long Island Sound, and where I live now and represent right on the ocean, we do a lot of fishing in the wintertime because of the outflow from two major utilities there. The outflow of the water keeps the water warmer, lots of bait, it's fun to fish there. Do you know of any reports that we can reference that talk about what the temperature differential would be and the effect would be on water bodies near these centers? I mean, I'm sure we can look it up. I'm just wondering, since you've mentioned it, if you know of any resources that we can go to.
Thank you for that excellent question, and I am sorry that I don't have data, although I'm happy to do some research and get back to the committee on that. The broader picture of data centers impacting environment, that's a good example of the could be unintended consequences if we weren't as thorough.
Thank you.
This one is. Hello? Weird.
So with regards to water, we've heard that come up several times during this hearing. So to put it into context, I'm curious to know, would you happen to know with regards to an average data center, could you equate that water usage? Because we are concerned with a lot of our municipalities, they're on wells and shared aquifers. I know larger municipalities and cities, they have alternate water sources, but would you happen to know an average data center to equate the water consumption to like number of houses? Like it uses this many gallons per whatever, and that's equivalent to the typical usage of a house, just so we can relate to that.
Thank you for the question. I wish I had a quantitative answer to that. I would caveat, I'm not sure what an average data center is. They're all large, but they do vary in size and demand on all the things we're talking about. I would expect that there is a gallon equation, but I don't know what it is. Not really.
Does this work? Seems to work. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my questions. There are a couple, if you will permit, Madam Chair. This committee looks at laws that the state have, so that municipalities put into place in the event of drought. And they limit the use of water, they limit the use of watering lawns, they limit how you can water a golf course, et cetera, et cetera. Were any of those ordinances and laws taken into consideration when you were crafting this bill? Like, for example, how would a data center comply with a no?
Sorry.
I think I hit my button. Is that on? Sorry. Thank you for that thoughtful question. I was not actually involved in the drafting of the original bill, so I don't know what background work was done in whether water and drought regulations were looked at that time. Neither the original language nor the amendment address water. I think that's a gap that needs to be addressed. And certainly looking at the coordination with existing statute, which I do realize exists, I actually very much realize it as a gardener, would be important to do.
Further questions? Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I'm sorry, I should have asked this question of the prime sponsor. Hopefully, Representative, you might know. Can data centers sell their information or do they only lease it? Because both the original bill and the amended version say, and is not used to lease data services to third parties. Is it, I'm just wondering if that should be broader or more specific?
Thank you for the question. I do not know currently that data centers sell their information. However, it would seem, I think that's a prudent consideration if it were to specify lease or sell. Then should data centers begin selling, which could happen, it's already addressed in the language at that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
Further questions? Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for taking my question. So a quick look, would you be surprised to learn that a mid-sized data center uses 300 gallons per day of water usage of roughly 1,000 households? And the concern regarding our current droughts and us being on wells, and even the large cities that they still have water sources. If we start draining that water systems, would there be a concern of the effect of households?
Thank you for that helpful question, and I'm not actually surprised. I perhaps wouldn't have been surprised if it was even more than that, and that's pretty impactful.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Very grateful to the committee for your diligence and work, and I hope you all have a good day.
Next, the chair recognizes Mr. Deshaies. Good morning and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to the committee for taking my testimony this morning. For the record, Brody Deshaies, I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are opposed to Senate Bill 439 as amended by the Senate. I'll also mention, while we didn't have the opportunity to, due to scheduling conflicts, to testify on the Senate side, the original Senate bill had significant technical flaws, but I'll only be speaking to the Senate's version of the bill as amended. So, as you heard, the original bill had significant different intent than how the bill is currently drafted, which was to regulate data centers through zoning and to establish minimum standards in state law where data centers could operate if a municipality permitted the use. I'll flag, municipalities can already determine whether to permit these uses, where to permit them, and how to regulate them in their local zoning ordinances. So the initial version of the bill really was redundant. It kind of micromanaged the way municipalities could permit these types of uses. It would make sense to regulate these uses possibly in chapters of law that regulate, state commerce or like businesses. When it comes to local land use, either a municipality permits the use and has other local zoning controls or does not permit the use. SB 439 was amended to do effectively the exact opposite of the bill's initial intent. It now mandates that data centers be permitted by right in zones where commercial and industrial uses are permitted, greatly expanding where data centers may be permitted in New Hampshire. To our knowledge, and based on some light research, I'm not aware of a single municipality that currently permits data centers. I know of many municipalities that permit industrial uses, commercial uses, heavy and light commercial uses, and even commercial uses are now required by right to be able to converted to be into residential uses after the passage of 2024's House Bill 631, and there are many mixed-use residential commercial districts across the state. So this bill would build upon the state's Franken zoning, and additionally, in those zones, those commercial zones that now are required to have a residential use, you could now have a data center as a portion of the first floor and residential above, which is frankly incompatible uses that the state would be mandating via SB 439 and building on top of already incompatible, possibly incompatible uses mandated by 2024's House Bill 631. As I've highlighted in my testimony that's being passed around right now, data centers often create negative environmental impacts and the overconsumption of local resources, as well as negatively impact individuals' quality of life and health if operated near residential areas or places people regularly frequent. So you could think a mixed-use development that the state has now mandated. It's best to let local officials and their voters determine how much risk they are willing to incur and whether to permit data centers to operate on specific land areas that can actually sustain this type of development in this type of commercial or industrial use. Senate Bill 439 is also very confusing considered in the broader context of the statutory scheme because the bill places a definition for data center in RSA 674. And again, as I just previously mentioned, it would probably be more applicable in a chapter of law regulating commerce in the state. And as has been kind of alluded to through some of the questions, Senate Bill 439 misapplies the planning board's operations and its regulations of local land use. The bill would require the planning board to obtain rulemaking authority from the municipality's legislative body in order to regulate data centers. Planning boards do not make rules like a department or state agency, as is kind of defined in RSA 541-A, the state's rulemaking authorities. Planning boards are empowered by state law to adopt rules of procedure concerning to method of conducting its business like any other local land use board under RSA 676:1. There may be additional oversight that the municipality's legislative body may provide to the planning board, such as adopting ordinances relative to subdivision or site plan review regulations, which are RSA 674:35 and 43. These processes are significantly different from the state's rulemaking administrative procedures established under RSA 541-A. As to the question about water, water could be addressed under site plan review if a municipality has adopted ordinances permitting it, which only about half of municipalities have adopted site plan review ordinances. There are also DS regulations, but I'm unsure if they've adopted rules for how they would specifically regulate these specific type of uses and how much water they would intake. Also, public utilities like water systems, they might deny a data center's ability to hook up if it's determined that they're going to overconsume water and that there's not enough, capacity for discharge or for intake. Our position would be the original bill should have been interim studied or established as a study commission, and still this bill needs significant work, the original version, the current bill, and it should be interim studied or there should be a study commission. And I do not foresee municipalities permitting this type of use anytime soon because of how politically unpopular it is on a local level and statewide and nationally. Additionally, from what I've heard from some of our planners around the state, municipal planners, is that our utility systems, or I should say our utilities and our electric grid, doesn't even have the capacity to sustain these type of data centers. So even if someone wanted to establish a data center, it's not even clear whether or not they can even get a utility hookup. So there's a significant long way that New Hampshire even has to go in development, economic development, for these to even be viable, even if they were mandated. So, but we would be strongly opposed to them being mandated in every commercial and industrial zone or zones that permit those uses, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Deshays? Representative Gilman is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Do you think either the original or the amendment should have consulted with the different agencies that deal with utilities and environment?
Thank you for the question, Representative Gilman. I know I was consulted on the initial drafting of the bill, and when I was consulted by the senator, I kind of explained that municipalities already have the specific powers and are enabled to adopt zoning, as she was kind of seeking when she shared with me some conceptual ideas and said this would be duplicative in the state law. When I saw the final drafting of the bill, I'm unaware of who was, consulted for on the final language as introduced. But I would say Department of Environmental Services should be consulted, Department of Energy should be consulted, Regional Planning Commissions should be consulted, or specifically the Association of Regional Planning Commissions, that's the umbrella for all those orgs. The New Hampshire Planners should be consulted. There's a lot of stakeholders, maybe the Public Utilities Commission. There's a significant number of stakeholders who should be consulted, and I'm unaware if they were ever consulted or if they're even aware of this bill's existence.
Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for taking my question. I'm just curious if I heard you correctly. This bill says, the amended version that we have, says data centers are allowed. Are allowed is equal to by right?
That would be my interpretation. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question also, Representative Gilman. Yes, I would say data centers are allowed within zoning districts designated for commercial or industrial use, albeit subject to the provisions of the local land use regulations. So there might be other local zoning controls or local land use controls. But yes, effectively, if they can meet some of those other ordinances, by right, data centers in any place where you permit a commercial or industrial use, which could be many of your neighborhoods.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the follow-up. So then that would mean they would need a cup or a variance, or are they permitted by right?
They would be, the way I would interpret this is that are allowed is effectively by right, as long as it's a land area or as long as the parcel or the lot is in a zone that permits a commercial or industrial use. And then obviously there are other zoning controls that can still exist, other ordinances, so they'd have to meet those ordinances. But if they meet all, typically like the dimensional controls and the setbacks, they could by right in a place where it's zoned for commercial industrial, open a data center which would have significant environmental and public welfare impacts.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And I'm just trying to establish I'm understanding this correctly. So should this bill become law, a municipality that does not have site plan regulations, let's say, to monitor water, would be mandated anyway, regardless of commercial or industrial zone having a large public water system. They would be mandated for a data center to move in under an allowable use.
So under this bill, if it's a parcel or a lot that's zoned for commercial or industrial uses, so it's in a zoning district that permits that on its table of uses, it would be, we would read it as are allowed is effectively by right. Now, you can have the right to build the data center. Infrastructure capacity is a whole other question. Now, one of the ways that you can, have local controls in your site plan review is to have specific ordinances related to adequate access to water. Now, there are additional state regulations that, I'd have to do more research on about how that would interplay with someone trying to establish a data center, but DES does have requirements. And then if there is a local public utility system, a water system, there's also other local requirements and capacity, impacts or limitations, I should say, that also fall under DS rules and local regulations. So this is really a multifaceted issue and a very hyper-local issue, which is probably why it's best for this to remain with the localities. And I would imagine most political subdivisions that are enabled to zone or that have zoning authority are not going to permit these uses because it's wholly unrealistic in most land areas across the state.
Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Deshaies, for taking my question. So when I was looking through various states and their data centers and concerns, one of the concerns was brought up, a lot of these data centers have non-public agreements that they're making behind the scenes. And could that include, let's look at increasing the public utility capacities and making sure all that before it even gets to the public to know this is happening. So would you agree that a town that puts in a data center and they might be negotiating upgrading electric grid, which is a cost, that those costs are then spread to not just that town, but to all taxpayers, all ratepayers under that utility. So it's really not just a local concern. This could become a greater concern across the state if these non-public agreements are being made and these costs are talking, or these upgrades are talking about. So I'm looking at it, do you agree that it could be more than just a hyper-local decision?
Thank you for the question, Representative Grund. So specific to the utility rate impacts, I'd have to defer to, the utilities themselves or the Public Utilities Commission. But I think the overarching point you're trying to make is that these data centers do have statewide and regional impacts, not just on land use and the intensity of use and how it impacts abutters or people in an entire region, but it can have impact on costs for infrastructure. And yes, I would agree with all of that.
Yes, follow up.
Would you then agree that the state it might make sense if the state puts in a framework? Again, it may be not in the way the original bill was written, but maybe in commerce and those different areas to address the statewide framework.
I thank you for the question, Representative Grund. I would 100% agree, and also notifications to the local, to the planning board, to let them know if there's something that could potentially be cited and to ensure that it's subject to local zoning and all other local zoning procedures or local land use controls. I think that could be a reasonable way, but I think we are still a far way from that and requires a commission with key stakeholders and key state agencies and key representatives of local associations to be able, or associations that represent local officials or local interests, to be able to figure out what is the best framework, how can this be regulated, in what commerce chapters, and how do we ensure that these local land use controls are respected and that these uses are still subject to those.
Representative Davis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Can you drill down a little bit more for me and for us on the conundrum posed by the law passed last year that mandates residential in commercial districts and the potential impact of this bill's focus on industrial and commercial districts as the only districts where data mining centers are permitted by right? Can you just drill down on the on-the-ground impact that might have on communities that are desperately trying to increase their housing by combining commercial and residential use?
Thank you for the question, Representative Davis. So under the current language of SB 439, were it to become law, it seems to imply, even though it uses the term are allowed, it seems to imply that data centers would be allowed by right in zoning districts that permit commercial or industrial uses. While the language isn't written in a way that makes sense in the statutory scheme of RSA 674, there's been a lot of language added in the last couple of years that is really ambiguous and gray, to put it bluntly. So this would add on top of, as you've just mentioned, House Bill 631, which was passed in 2024 and signed into law, which requires all zoning districts that permit commercial uses to allow residential uses. So now the state has already established a law that's a universal mandate requiring in areas that permit any type of commercial use, whether it be a heavy commercial use or very light commercial uses, residential uses, and allowing municipalities only to limit only to prohibit residential uses on the first story of a building. Now, under 439, if you were to add that to the existing statutes that are currently law established by House Bill 631, which was signed to law last year, you'd have to permit data centers in these same zones and even inside these same buildings potentially, which is clearly a very incompatible use. And frankly, because of the amount of resources and the amount of resources and public resources, or the amount of stress it would put on public water systems and other utilities, you would be limiting the amount of housing units that could potentially be available in these now mandated mixed-use districts. So in some ways, to your point, data centers could place a limitation on local infrastructure that's really necessary for trying to support housing, which is our biggest barrier to housing in the state, continues to be public infrastructure access, not zoning.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, could you, Representative Elward, raise your hand high next time so I can see it.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Deshays, for taking my question. Could line 10 and 11 of the amendment possibly be construed as an unfunded mandate by causing these stressors and potential costs to municipalities?
Thank you for the question, Representative Alward. As much as I would really want to say yes because of the cost, I don't think it would meet the, I don't think it would be technically in violation of 28A, Amendment 28A to our state constitution. So, however, I think the point has really been stressed through previous questions that there will be additional costs created for municipalities, other political subdivisions that are enabled to do zoning or that provide services, and to potentially residents of the state.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
So I have one final pink card here, and that is Ms. Weston. Good morning and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity. Chairman Power, members of the committee, I'm here this morning on behalf of the New England Connectivity and Telecommunications Association. We appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to the bill in front of you. Throughout New England, NECTA members provide state-of-the-art internet, video, voice, and wireless offerings, as well as cutting-edge products, services, and emerging technologies. Our members operating in New Hampshire are Comcast, BreezeLine, and Charter Communications. Together, our members serve approximately 485,000 customers, and they offer their services to more than 695,000 locations in the state. Our primary concern with what's in front of you is that the term data center would, as defined, would capture a broad swath of communications network infrastructure, including structures used by ISPs to deliver services throughout the state of New Hampshire, including residential zones. To the extent that you wish to pursue some type of legislation, the term data center should be very carefully defined so that there are not unintentional consequences to include facilities which power broadband access. Again, we believe that this has very serious unintended consequences. It captures within the definition, for example, our head ends, which are rarely more than 10,000 square feet. It would also capture our hubs, which are smaller units, about 100 to 200 square feet. These head ends and hubs are the basis of our network that we use to deploy broadband into all of our neighborhoods and communities. Without additional qualifiers, again, these vital facilities that are necessary to operate broadband networks would be included. Importantly, our network infrastructure does not consume the amount of water or energy that has been discussed heretofore this morning in committee. I would note that some states, although very few, have pursued these types of regulations. We have seen Oregon, for example, define large energy use facilities as one that is able to use 20 megawatts or more. Minnesota, it took a slightly different approach with 100 megawatts or more. And I just want to note that we're very proud that New Hampshire is currently on track to be the first state in the nation to achieve 100% broadband coverage. And we are set to receive almost, as a state, almost $200 million in federal funding through the BEAD program to finish building out to the unserved and underserved areas of the state. And we would just caution you that we certainly wouldn't want the consequences of this bill to impede that deployment effort. So we respectfully request that you recommend this inexpedient to legislate, or certainly work to amend the bill to more narrowly define data center. We certainly agree with the chair that it is important to get this right, and we are happy to work with the committee to do so. And I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Are you willing to take questions?
Certainly, if I can answer.
Questions for Ms. Weston. Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for taking this question.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you have hubs that are small, 100, 200 square feet or so.
Yeah,
Is it possible that those could be located in residential areas?
absolutely.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up to that question, and is it also true that these telecom hubs, it's sheltered? It's a sheltered means of sheltering the switching devices for the broadband, and that they are typically not manned by people except for on occasion to check the equipment.
That's my understanding, yes. Thank you for the question.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
That was my last pink card, so I will quickly ask, is there anybody present who wishes to provide testimony on this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, the chair will recognize Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The remote testimony shows 2 in support and 3 opposed.
Thank you.
And the in-room blue sheet shows, I guess, one, wants it both for and con. So no opinion?
I was told to get a few more bills before you hear mine. Okay.
There we go. I'm wrong. Pleasantly surprised. You get the senator treatment.
50 feet out of the building, that means nothing.
So with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 439. And unfortunately, or fortunately, because we're asking a lot of questions, nevertheless, we are not adhering to our schedule. So at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 643, which was scheduled to commence at 11 a.m. So the chair would like to recognize the prime sponsor. Oh, I'm opening the hearing on Senate Bill 643 FN, requiring cities and towns to hold a public hearing and conduct a roll call vote when seeking to override a tax or spending cap. And the chair recognizes the prime sponsor, Senator Avard. Good morning. I apologize for the overrun here, and welcome to municipal and county government.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. It's nice to see such wonderful smiling faces this morning. You need windows in here, right? You need some light in here. I am the prime sponsor of SB 643. And for the record, I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12. And it's really a simple bill. Basically, 643 is simply transparency and accountability. A bill intended to give taxpayers more information and more time to express their opinions when it comes to local spending that could impact their local property taxes. Under this bill, if a city or a town with existing tax cap or spending cap wants to override that cap, they would have to ensure at least a 30-day notice prior to the vote, hold a public hearing so members of the public could express their concerns in support or in opposition, and this bill would also require a roll call vote. It does not change any town or city's legal authority to override the tax or spending cap, but what it does is it ensures that when an override is proposed, the process is open, deliberate, and visible to the public who pay the bills. Local tax caps and spending caps are adopted by the voters because they want predictability and lower property taxes. If a municipality believes an override is necessary, that may be a reasonable discussion, but it would happen in open with adequate and proper notice for real opportunity for the public input and with recorded vote that the taxpayers can actually see. Local elected officials should not be able to hide from their votes especially when it comes to raising taxes. This bill ensures that taxpayers know when an override is being considered and have time to be heard and see clearly that how their elected officials voted right on their tax bill. It's about trust. It's about transparency. It's about respecting the voter's intent. This is what local control is all about because it puts more control and gives more voice to individual citizens in how the town spends their money. This bill is not aimed at communities that have a town meeting or government with direct vote by voters. It is focused on cities and towns with select boards and council. I believe this is a common sense step that strengthens local decision-making and protects property taxpayers. And just to recap, it respects voters' intents on local tax and spending caps. It's sunlight before higher taxes are proposed. It prevents a quiet or rushed overrides so that people can see what's going on. It creates real accountability. It puts information where the taxpayers can actually see it, and it does not block local authorities. It also encourages better budgeting discipline. Every year we hear my property tax, along with energy. Energy is another issue. And I noticed you were talking a little bit about the data centers. Just want to let you know, data centers do provide a lot of tax revenue. Just saying. But that's another bill. But so that is basically the intent of this bill. Again, it doesn't change the ability for local cities or municipalities to change their override of a spending cap, but it does allow a little bit more accountability. So that's pretty much my testimony.
Thank you. Are you willing to take questions?
Sure.
The chair recognizes Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. Can you help me out? I'm a little bit confused. I sit on the Lebanon City Council, and we meet in public. We do roll call votes. We notice those meetings at least 10 days in advance. What is not transparent about that process?
Well, this bill allows up to a 30-day notification, and it also allows a 60-minute time for the public to discuss this override. Nashua is a much bigger city, and we could use a little bit more transparency, whether that or Manchester. But 10 days, some people might be on vacation. A 30-day would be a little bit more agreeable to your local population, I would believe.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, follow up.
60 minutes, you say? At least 60 minutes?
At least 60 minutes.
At least 60 minutes. So somebody could go on for 2 hours, and
Well,
that would be okay.
As a committee chair, I also know that I can limit it to speeches up to 2 minutes when it comes to my committees. So
But this bill says at least 60 minutes.
60 minutes for the
So
public
how
hearing.
can you limit if it says at least?
At least 60 minutes. If you want to go longer, that's up to you.
But you just said you could go shorter. I'm confused.
No, I didn't. I said that if you want to limit speeches, the hearing has to be at least 60 minutes. And you can limit the time that people can come in and speak for 2 minutes on the particular topic, and you could spread that out. And if you want to, if there's enough, I would assume in your town that you would welcome more speech if you had a number of people that were interested in talking about that.
Thank you.
Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So this bill only applies to cities and towns with council forms of government. So a town council or a city council.
Correct.
Okay. And those that also have a tax or a spending cap.
Correct.
How many communities does this bill cover?
I think Nashua has one. I think Franklin has one. I believe Manchester has one. I believe Rochester has one. I'm not sure about Salem. Somerville and Dover. That's quite a population. There's 90,000 people in Nashua alone.
Representative Majori is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for taking my question, which is a direct follow-up to Representative Colby. The communities that you mentioned, with all due respect, are all cities. We're trying to find out, and I did ask an HMA, and they couldn't come up with it either. We're wondering how many towns have a town council by charter or statute. So we're just trying to find out how, and also have a tax or spending cap.
That
It's-
I don't know off the
Okay.
top,
Okay,
but
thank
thanks for the question.
Further questions? Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator, for taking my question. I'm wondering about the timing of this because I'm from a town does SB2, so I just trying to understand the timing. My tax bill changes in November. Our SB2 town, so again, not town council situation, but we vote in March. So when are the typical voting times of these tax cap bills being voted, and when is that next tax bill sent out to people? So what names are on that? Are they actually part of council at the time? But, so in March, we vote, and that changes our tax, could change our taxes, but our tax rate doesn't change till November when it's set by the DRA.
Okay.
Our selectmen, our school board, those may no longer be members of the board when those things come out. So what is the relevance of the name being on the
Well,
tax?
they also may still be on the board as well, and it is more of an accountability.
But if they're no longer on the board, I'm sorry, may I have a follow-up?
Well,
Yes, you caught me
You're
taking
assuming-
notes.
I do
So-
believe you're assuming they won't be on the board, but
And if they're not, what's the relevance of their name being on there?
it's public record. They might want to run for another office. It's nice to know their track record.
Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking another question. Kind of piggybacking off of Representative Grunz, does DRA wade in, and do we know if they're capable of producing such a statement on a tax bill
I
that
would-
includes a roll call vote and within their software, or how much would that cost?
I believe a town can figure out how to do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Further questions? Representative Walker is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rochester and I believe Dover and Somersworth, and I'm not sure about Lebanon, the tax cap is in place and it's in our charter. So this law doesn't really do anything to those cities because we already have that requirement in our charters.
It doesn't change anything. All it does is it allows for a roll call vote, and it allows a 30-day notice along with a specific time set, at least at minimum of 60 minutes for the public to weigh in on it, so that they're not surprised how come my taxes went up? Who voted to override our tax cap or our spending cap? Right now, this basically allows for transparency on who voted for it, so that it's just not a voice vote.
Follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Well, in Rochester, we have overridden our tax cap once since we put it in our charter 20 years ago. And there's always a line out the door if you try even suggesting overriding the tax cap. So I don't think the 60 minutes we have a problem with either, because it's going to take that long. However, your other requirement about putting it on the tax bill, we've dealt with this a couple of times with other information that people have been wanting to put on tax bills. Some municipalities, including Rochester, the Munis module that we use, you can't change anything on the tax bill or add anything on the tax bill without having Munis choke on it and shut down. So it would be a very costly thing for a city like Rochester to buy a new Munis module to go into the financial system to create such a note on the tax bill.
That's the first I've heard of that since
And
the.
like this one, many towns that have Munis.
Mhm. Is that a question?
How do you answer that?
It's the first I've heard of it.
Thank you.
Further questions? Just have a quick a point or question / point. It's standard practice that meetings of governing bodies, that they have meeting minutes. And just give me an example of, for example, in Nashua, when you're dealing with the budget and you're seeking to perhaps override the tax cap, that those votes and that information would be included in the meeting minutes. And so where is that accessible to the public, and how easy or difficult is it for people to find that information? Could you speak to that?
I would agree that they would have minutes on it, but a roll call vote would make it, well, we have minutes in our hearings as well. And so a roll call vote just makes it very clear who voted for what instead of it being a voice. Because the mayor could call it, and it was a voice vote and ruled on how it went. But there really isn't a super amount of accountability on a voice vote.
So to be clear, that the issue at hand is with a voice vote, the public doesn't really know, unless they're perhaps in the room or listening to a recording, and they can distinguish voices, who voted for or against overriding.
Yes, Madam Chair, and this really isn't a heavy lift. I just think this is a little bit more accountability. People are very concerned about their tax bills. They want to know who voted for or against. A 30-day notice seems to be a little bit more transparent than a 10-day notice. That's all.
Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and this follows up with you. I'm just not sure I'm not sure if something might be happening in Nashua that's illegal, because according to according to RSA 91A 2 sub E, all votes taken during such a meeting shall be by roll call. You must have a roll call. Maybe it's a better question for NHMA. I'm just curious if this is not happening in Nashua?
This will ensure it to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Grunt, I'm going to recognize Representative Gilman because she hasn't had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. My question is, like some communities, including mine, Exeter, televise their meetings and also allow remote access for the general public. Would that be something that Nashua does, so that people can have input within those 10 days, example?
Thank you for your question, Representative, and we do televise.
Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking another question. So you're saying that a roll call vote will be taken and then published on the tax bill, whether the override happens or doesn't happen, the vote just shows up on, will that be confusing to people who receive their tax bill and they're seeing names with votes, and even if it didn't pass an override?
I wouldn't be confused.
Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking another question. I have so many. If 91A2 doesn't ensure that this roll call vote is happening in Nashua, if that is not enough for Nashua to take their roll call votes, why would putting this bill into law change that?
Why would it change what? The 91-2A?
Madam Chair, may I?
It basically, it doesn't put it on your tax bill, does it? Right?
My understanding, when Representative Majori was reading, that it's already required to do a roll call vote. I heard an answer that said, well, this will ensure that it does happen if it's
Not all
not
towns-
happening in Nashua.
Not all towns do that. Or do they?
they should, but if there's already a state statute, I guess that's where I'm going, and they're not following a state statute, what was going to make this state statute mandating a roll call vote any different?
It would definitely ensure it for certain, and I don't know if you know the history of Nashua in 91A requests. It's not very good. There's a lot of Supreme Court cases that have gone forward where people have been denied their 91 A's, and I believe putting a roll call and having it on your tax bill gives individuals in the town something tangible to hold and say, hey, what's going on? You overrode it. Why? Were you there for the public hearing? No. Did I know there was a public hearing? No. The resistance to this type of thing is very telling. The taxpayers want to know why their property taxes are going up, instead of the municipalities blaming the state all the time. So we overrode it. Why? Well, because we bought a new building. Well, how much was the building? Well, you have to do a 91A on that. Does that happen? Yeah, it happens. Why do we need this building? Why do we need this? It allows them to at least have something tangible to hold. See a name, well, this is what my alderman did, or this is what my selectman did. Why is that a problem?
I'm going to intervene right now. So the question that is being asked is, we currently have 91A that requires that a roll call be taken. And in some municipalities, this law is not being followed. And I believe the question is, we understand the merits of the bill. And I think the question that's being asked is, if a municipality is choosing not to follow Law A, what evidence do we have that if this bill were to be enacted, that they're going to choose to follow this? I think that's the question.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do also know that this bill also requires a 30-day public notice. It also requires at least 60 minutes of a public input at least. That allows for more transparency. So, you know, all combined, this whole thing makes sure that the public is notified. That's the gist of this.
Thank you. Representative Davis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. If a community does not follow Law A, and this is enacted, and that community chooses not to follow Law B, this act, why did you not write any consequences for that noncompliance into your bill?
I do believe that individuals would be able to take civil action against the city.
Yes, follow up.
Could they not do the same with a violation of 91A?
They possibly could, but this allows more transparency. 30 days and a public hearing, at least 60 minutes.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, committee. Appreciate the questions. Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me go.
Okay. So next, the chair recognizes Mr. Deshaies.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to the committee for taking my testimony. Brody Deshaies, the New Hampshire Municipal I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We're opposed to the bill. I just want to clarify one thing that's been very prevalent in the line of questioning to the senator who introduced his bill. RSA 91-A:2 does not require a roll call of every vote. Under subsection Roman 3, and subsection of that, E, it requires a roll call vote if there's remote participation for any public body. So if you have folks participating remotely, to make it clear over who's voting and how they're voting, that is when that in ultimately remote participation is determined by whether or not the public body is going to allow it. So for these aldermanic boards, town councils, effectively these charter municipalities, if they permit remote attendance, then they're required when they're making decisions, voting on issues, voting on resolutions, voting in any capacity that's under their purview, they must have a roll call vote if there's folks participating remotely. And obviously they need to have a quorum of those physically present to be able to have any meeting. So, remote participation doesn't count towards a quorum, but someone can participate remotely and participate in the meeting who's a duly elected official sworn in. So I want to be very clear about that, and I'm not aware of any municipality that is violating that statute at the moment. And the AG's office has provided pretty robust information on how municipalities abide by that Section 91A, especially since COVID and since these statutes were updated. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the bill or potentially pertaining to that, but
Questions? Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not a question, it's an apology for throwing the committee off by misreading the statute. It wasn't my intent, and I certainly apologize to the senator for throwing him off. I'm not sure he's here, but I just wanted to do that publicly. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Page 2, lines 1 and 2, the famous public comment period, during which any resident may address the proposed override. Do we know a resident of where?
thank you for the question, Representative. So I assume it's implying resident of the municipality. However, the way it's written could be construed as resident of anywhere. However, these are also public meetings. So no one can be stopped from participating in the public hearing. They can be from Timbuktu and they still get to speak and say what they want. I'll flag, that's kind of duplicative because in most processes and what's required by state law, even for charter municipalities, there is a public hearing on the budget and all the questions that are going to be adopted. So this would just be an additional public hearing requirement specific to the override, but part of the budget that's presented that overrides, there would still be a public hearing. So you'd effectively have 2 public hearings on the same proposed budget that overrides the tax cap.
May I ask a follow-up?
Follow up.
Thank you. So if there was I get concerned with bills like this as how they could be potentially weaponized. So there could potentially be people from other municipalities or anywhere coming during a at least 60-minute public comment duration. So if there are folks that are asking questions or making public comment, I should say, and that eats up an actual resident of the community's time to speak, they've already, and the body, the governing body, acting as a legislative body in this case, already has met the at least 60-minute in duration requirement. Could they potentially say, we are all done with public comment for the day?
Thank you for the question, Representative Colby. So with these public hearing requirements that have duration requirements, which aren't too many, but obviously, for example, I believe school boards are required to have at least 1 or 2 public comment periods over a certain duration of time. You can't prohibit people from speaking, even if they're non-residents. And it's pretty typical when people go and they speak and they use that allotted time where the governing body needs to make a decision. Are we going to continue the duration of this public comment period or this public hearing period? Or are we going to need to facilitate and get to the business of the meeting, move on to the business of the meeting and potentially have a public comment period, at the end of the meeting if that's what they typically do on the local level. So I certainly hear your concerns, but there's nothing in that language that's too astride from what's currently required, other than the fact that you would effectively be requiring a second additional public hearing on the same proposed budget that overrides the tax cap.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Stavis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also have an apology to make to the senator and the committee. I misread the 60-minute thing as being an individual thing and not. a public meeting thing, so my apologies for that. But as going back to that 60-minute thing, if the bill says at least 60 minutes, and the public hearing section is over in 40 minutes, is the governing body obligated to extend that so it meets the criteria of at least 60 minutes? I'm just kind of drilling down on words, at least.
I think at least means at least 60 minutes. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to go at least 60 minutes. So if you start at, let's say, 5 o'clock, you got to go at least to 6 p.m. And then once 6:01 hits, you can move on with whatever other business the governing body might be, dealing with on their agenda that evening.
Follow up?
Just a quick follow-up. So that means that if the public comment has been exhausted at minute 45, you can't close that public comment session for another 15 minutes.
Thank you for the question, Representative Davis. That would be my interpretation, that they would just sit there in silence or unless someone else showed up and wanted to provide public comment.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
So that was my last pink card for this bill. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak to this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, the chair will recognize Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The blue sheets record, or remote testimony records 11 in support and 59 opposed. And the in the room blue sheet shows one in support and 1 opposed.
Thank you, Representative Gilman. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 643 FN. So I apologize to the prime sponsors who are present. As you can see, the committee is running not according to schedule. So at this time, we're going to take up Senate Bill 508. So at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 508 relative to the Zoning Board of Adjustment appeal period. Chair would like to recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Murphy. Again, I apologize. Good morning and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Senator Keith Murphy. I represent District 16. That's the towns of Goffstown, Hooksett, Candia, Raymond, and North Manchester. Senate Bill 508 does 2 things. Section 1 of the bill adds that all grounds for appeal must be stated in the initial office. It deals with appeals to the Board of Adjustment from an abutter or department. So it just says that the grounds for appeal must be stated in the initial notice. It can't come later. Section 2 is really, in my opinion, the most important part of the bill. It starts on line 10. And what this does, it says that towns and town planning boards get one bite at the apple. One of the issues that we have with housing and building housing in this state is that it takes a long time sometimes to get through the planning approval process. And I've been a town planner. I can speak from experience. And there are times where an applicant files the application, goes to the planning board hearing, is given a list of things to corrects those things, comes back, and the planning board says, "Thank you, that looks good. Now here's more things to work on." And it turns into a back and forth, and it extends sometimes for 5, 6, 7 months. And time is money for a builder. So what this says is that there's one bite of the apple. Line 17, applicants shall not be required to revise plans more than once unless submitted revisions fail to address specific comments or conditions identified during the initial review. Planning board shall not require multiple rounds of revisions beyond those originally requested. This is critical language, and it will speed up and make it possible for people to actually build at a saving money and in a faster time frame. And that's my testimony, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Are there questions for the senator? Representative Gilman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. Are you concerned at all that the 10-day stamping process will conflict in the 30 days that abutters have to appeal a decision by the planning board?
Thank you for the question, Representative. No, they have 10 days to appeal after after the decision is rendered by the planning board. That's when that clock begins. It just says they must accept revised plans within 10 days of submission. Accepting the plans does not necessarily, that generates the approval. So that's when the 30 days begins. So they're two different unrelated deadlines, other than one triggers the other. Thank you.
Representative Majori is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So there in line 13, it says, Roman 1, each city, town, or municipality shall stamp and accept revised plans. Who stamps and accepts the plans?
Thank you for the question. That's going to vary from town to town. Often it's a town planner if the town is of a sufficient size and has made that decision to hire a town planner. It could be the town clerk, whoever's designated in that town. Usually the town planner or the town planning board's representative.
Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. Going back to lines 13 and 14, what happens if plans are not stamped or accepted within 10 days?
Well, there's not a cure listed there. Thank you for the question. There's not a cure listed there. They would simply be expected to stamp and accept them as fast as possible. What that does is give an applicant the opportunity, if they so choose and feel that they must, go to court, and this gives them grounds to go to court and say, look, I submitted this three weeks ago and they haven't done it. And look, the RSA requires it, but there's no consequence to the town beyond the possibility of opening themselves to litigation.
Follow up.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about some of the smaller towns who have one person who's going through and stamping and they go on vacation for 2 weeks. What happens?
Well, in that case, thank you for the question. In that case, the town should designate someone else to pick up. You don't go without a police chief for 2 weeks, without somebody else taking on those duties. A planner, a town having decided to hire a planner, the duties of the planner are important. And they can't just simply say, hang up a closed sign and go away for 2 weeks and nothing moves through the office. Things have to happen. Those duties get reassigned to someone else.
Further questions? Representative Walker is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sometimes applicants change plans multiple times to address certain issues, but then by doing so, they create other issues. So if that happens, can't ask for another change. So how do you address that? And if that happens continuously, the planning board or ZBA won't be able to ask for changes, so they have to deny that plan as is without further changes. So isn't that problematic?
Thank you for the question, Representative. In my opinion, no, because the planning board lays out a series of conditions and things that need to be addressed. If the plans come back revised and they do not address those specific issues, if they create different issues, then they didn't meet the requirement. And then the planning board's perfectly empowered to go back and say, look, you need to address these issues the way that we said, and come back when it's done. I don't believe there's going to be a different, opening a can of worms. Having sat through dozens and dozens of these planning board meetings, I can tell you that the planning board members are extremely clear, and with the town planner, and what the conditions are. There's a multi-page findings issued, and the expectations of the planning board are very clear. There's no way they're going to come back with a completely different set of issues that were created by the revisions. They say what they like and what they don't like. And I understand the concern, but I don't believe that in none of the hearings that I've sat through have I ever seen that happen, where they come back with a completely different set of plans that the planning board then doesn't accept. if they revise the plans in response to those comments and address the comments, and they didn't change anything else, the planning board should accept them, not purposely delay. And that's what I've seen happen. I can tell you that there are towns in this state, unfortunately, that welcome litigation. And I've sat there and listened to town planning boards say, or listened to town planners say, this is entitled by right. We have no basis for denying this application. And the planning board says, well, let them sue us. And that's just not a very wise use of taxpayer dollars. And it's wasteful for both the applicant and the town. That's what this legislation is intended to address.
Thank you.
Further questions? The chair recognizes Representative Majori.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking another question. I'm curious why you put this, so line 12, why you're putting the stamping and accepting of revised plans in the ZBA section and not in 676-4, which is the section of statute where the planning board received revised plans. It seems like it's in the wrong section of law.
Thank you for the question. That's where OLS placed it. If you'd like to move it over there, that's fine with me. That, we all file legislation the same way. They're the same people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Chair recognizes Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking another question. I'm kind of following up on the how many days of submission that the public has to comment or make a choice about going to the ZBA. With the 10 business days of a revised submission that doesn't have to go back to the planning board, when does the public know that the application has been approved by someone or stamped and approved?
Okay. Thank you for the question. So if we go to line 13, each town, city, municipality shall stamp and accept revised plans within 10 days of submission. So they accept the plans, they issue the decision, and then the 30-day window mentioned in line 5, that's when that kicks in. So they have 30 days after the plans are accepted to appeal.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So, keep saying representative, I'm sorry. This is the first hearing after crossover. I'm used to representative. Senator Murphy, I do not have a pink card from you? Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So I don't have any additional pink cards. If there's any, let me see.
Yeah. Oh, it was missing. Is that mine or is that?
I have it here. I'm playing chair and vice chair
I
at the same
understand.
time.
That's okay. I have testimony. I'm gonna.
Okay. The chair recognizes Mr. Deshays. Sorry for misplacing your card.
I totally understand, Madam Chairwoman. So I'm passing around some written testimony from our association, just getting my stuff organized. So my name's Brody Deshays. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are opposed to Senate Bill 508. Our key opposition is solely because of Section 2 in the bill. So Section 2 of Senate Bill 508 seems to be attempting to require municipalities to, quote, stamp and accept revised plans submitted by an applicant within 10 days of submission, end quote, and prevent the planning board or other municipal officials from requesting additional changes to ensure the application meets all local requirements in the proposed site or subdivision plan is conforming. Under the newly proposed RSA 676:5 -A, Roman 1, and SB 508, while it's unclear, it seems to suggest that all site or subdivision plans must be stamped and any revisions accepted within 10 business days of the initial submission of those plans. It's also unclear what stamped is meant to signify. Usually the Register of Deeds may stamp a subdivision plat for their records. So nowhere else in the RSAs related to planning boards is stamped out, explicitly mentioned. So does this mean it's when it's received or approved or prepared and ready for a hearing? If stamp means that the plans were received by the municipality, which supporters of the bills have regularly testified to, at least in the previous chamber, it would be wholly unrealistic for a planning board to always meet within the 10 days of submission, hold a public hearing, and fully review the submitted application, and then again potentially having to do that. The posting requirements in a newspaper of general circulation would be nearly impossible. So there's a 10-day posting requirement where you can't include the day of when it's posted and the day of the hearing. So additionally, these posting requirements that are already well established in RSA 675:7 and the cross-cited statutes in that statute and several other statutes pertaining to planning board's administrative procedures, that is the process for posting these requirements. And under the current draft of the bill, it would be impossible to meet the requirements under RSA 91A in many cases and the existing posting requirements for planning boards in their hearing process. It's also unrealistic for all aspects of local site plan or subdivision regulations for every development to be addressed in a single rush meeting and hearing within 10 days of the initial submission and ensure the entire plan conforms. And I think Representative Walker's line of questioning really highlighted this issue. So this paragraph would require local planning boards to accept incomplete plans under unreasonable and hurried timelines, promoting poorly planned and non-conforming development throughout the municipality. Requiring planning boards it could also potentially require planning boards to deny plans that could easily be made conforming after one more final review. Additionally, the bill is unclear regarding what the initial review is. There are many different under RSA 676:1, there are many different administrative procedures a municipality can adopt, either requiring permission from the legislative body to adopt them or other things that are just internal procedures that help the town's planning department or economic development department operate smoothly. So is this initial review, is this the preliminary or conceptual review with a municipal employee like the town planner? Is it an initial review of the plans by the technical review committee, which might be the town planner, town engineer, and other stakeholders who need to review, who have infrastructure departments that are impacted by the development? Is it the first public hearing before the planning board, where the planning board might review after these first two steps? This lack of clarity will create confusion and inconsistent application of these universally mandated and mostly unworkable administrative procedures. Also, as has been mentioned by a couple of the representatives, the newly proposed RSA 676:5-A does not make sense in the existing statutory scheme. The new provisions of the proposed law vaguely address administrative procedures and timelines for planning boards reviewing site and subdivision plans, but are placed in the section of law relative to administrative procedures for zoning boards of adjustments. So that's problematic to place this in a statute where the planning board is not going to be looking for when they're trying to figure out what are their statutory requirements, what do they need to fulfill as part of their role under the RSAs. So with that, we oppose Senate Bill 508, not just because of the unworkable concept it proposes, but also the significant technical flaws that still went unaddressed in the Senate in the bill. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Representative Davis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I have a question and a follow-up about the specific meanings of words. And one is in line 13. It's the word accept. How would you interpret that word in this context?
So the Municipal Association has interpreted it as accept as in approved.
Yeah.
The New Hampshire Planners Association, they're not, I shouldn't say their entire association, but members of their executive board who have had, several conversations about this bill. Some agree with our interpretation. Others view it as, well, we just have to show that we've received the plans, which is a typical procedure where, the town planner might, they might write the date of when they've received it, Dan, which the plans, which could be perceived as potentially stamping. Now, based on testimony that we've heard in the previous chamber, which was a little bit different than the testimony we heard today, is that accept was intended in the bill to mean accepting the plans as in approving the plans as final.
Follow-up, Madam Chair?
Yes.
How would you interpret the word revised when it appears in the bill? Is it when the planning board revises, or what happens when the developer revises? Does the clock get reset, or are we still under the same stamping and accepting scheme. How is a planning board supposed to decipher these very specific words?
So I'm going to read the entire paragraph there and try to best answer your question, but this legislation's clear as mud. So
Rep-
it says,
Mr. Deshays, you're going to read the bill text to us?
not the, just Roman 2 and trying to help answer the question. So not the whole, just this, if that's okay with you, Madam Chairwoman. So of subsection 2, Roman 2,
And this is
lines
line
15 and 16. Sorry, I'm not going to read the entire bill, if that's okay.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Acceptance under paragraph 1 shall be contingent upon the revised plans reflecting the specific alterations requested during the initial planning board review. So it would seem as if under Roman 1, there is an initial review that happens. And then after that initial review, that there's a requirement for the planning board after their review to accept revised plans. And that's contingent upon the revisions made by the applicant reflecting the specific requests that were made only at the first public hearing, even if the revisions they make could potentially not address those initial requests, or they might conflict with other issues or other incompatibilities that happened in the revisions that go contrary to the site plan or the subdivision review. So I would say revised in this context, based on our interpretation of the bill, is revisions made by the applicant.
The chair recognizes Representative Majori.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thought I understood it, but now I'm confused. Are you suggesting in what you said before about NHMA's position that at an initial, how about that? How about at a preliminary consultation, which can happen at a public hearing or in a work session? So might not necessarily be noticed if it's happening in a work session, that preliminary consult is or is not the initial planning board review? Because that whatever happens in the preliminary consult is non-binding. It's just, hey, I've got an idea. What do you guys think? And here are our ideas. So is that an initial planning board review?
I think this bill is very unclear. And I think that's a significant problem with the current language in front of you. I think that's what's implied in talking to several municipal planners. It's extremely unclear how they would be able to implement this, and it would be very inconsistent. Right now, we have very consistent laws and how it's typically applied, the current review of site plans and subdivision plans. This would just add an unnecessary shot clock, effectively, and unknowing, many municipalities would be confused when that shot clock starts in ways that would contradict with existing posting requirements that planning boards and planners are used to. I think that's the key. That's really overarching key issue with the bill here. Conceptually, while it may sound like a good idea, it's really significantly flawed. It's not workable under our current statutory scheme or how we approve site plan or subdivision plans.
Thank you.
If there's going to be many more questions, I'm going to need to recess this hearing because I do see a number of senators here, and we are unfortunately not adhering to our schedule. So I'd like to take up the senators' bills. Could you indicate how many more questions we have with regards to this bill? I see Representative Stavis has a question. Should I expect additional questions? Okay, Representative Stavis is recognized for a question.
Thank you. Can you speak to the impact on larger cities that regularly receive 10 to 20 proposals from developers every month, maybe even more, on how the shot clock, as you put it, would actually happen? How could they possibly deal with that?
Thank you for the question, Representative Stavis. And effectively, I think looking at it from an administrative standpoint, you would have a rushed, hurried group of municipal administrators or employees that need to prep everything for these meetings. You'd have to increase the frequency of when the planning board meets, presuming that this initial review is one that's done by the planning board with other municipal employees who are present to comment and to provide technical feedback. And you would have to increase the amount of meetings. So you'd have more meetings, higher intensity, and you'd effectively be creating an environment where everything is rush, hurried, mistakes are more likely to be made, and plans are approved with either not in line or in violation of the site plan or subdivision review, or just get denied because it's unrealistic even for the developer to meet these requirements. I mean, this bill, I see zero benefit when it comes to a standpoint of increasing housing supply for the municipality or the developer. It's just going to create absolute muddiness and stagnation in the entire process rather than a thoughtful, deliberative process that can take anywhere from 15 to 60 days usually.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. And
Thank you.
that represents my last pink card for this bill. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak to this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the remote testimony, we had 10 in support and 0 opposed. And in the room, we have 1 in support.
Thank you. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 508. So this is the way I'm going to proceed. I have, like I said, I see a number of senators here. We are not adhering to our published schedule. So I would like the senators to be able to introduce their bills so they may proceed with their day. So with regards to Senate Bill 653, I have 1 pink card. Is there anybody in the room currently that will be providing testimony? Okay, so I don't see anybody. So at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 653, enabling counties to change the dates of their biennial budgets. That the chair recognizes Senator Lang. Thank you for being here, and I apologize for being behind schedule. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am Senator Tim Lang. I represent Senate District 2, which is in the Lakes region. I have before you Senate Bill 653. It's a pretty simple bill. It wants to allow the option. This is an enabling language bill. Having served in the House, I know how much delegation work you guys do in the counties. And so the idea was to kind of streamline some of that. We know that in the first year when you're elected, many state representatives don't know that they have a delegation requirement, and never mind that delegation requirement requires budgetary action in the county, which you may or may not be familiar with. So what this bill seeks to do is basically delay that, or potentially delay that 1 year to give you a chance to learn what you're doing, and then be able to act on a budget. So in essence, what this bill says is that at the county, if a majority of the county commissioners vote before September 1st, on an election year, they can put on the state ballot a question to the county voters. Do you want to allow the county to move from annual budgets to biennial budgets, once every 2 years instead of once every year? And it would be in the off year of the state budget. So those of us like myself that serve on the finance committee are dealing with a heavy budget finance load during the budget season. Don't necessarily have a lot of time, and I know it's the same for the House on the finance committee, very active time in that first 3 months of the year. And at the same time, you're trying to put a multi-billion-dollar state budget together. You're also trying to do a multi-million-dollar county budget at the same time. So the idea is to offset this workload. And in the first year of your term, you would do the state budget. In the second year of the term, you would do the county budget. Again, but this is only if the county commissioners, before September 1st of an election year, vote to put the question to the voters. And then the question is put the voters, and the majority of your county's voters agree that that's a good idea. The other idea behind this is, again, it reduces the administrative workload on some of your professionals that are working, your sheriff and your county attorney, allow them to focus on their job by only doing the budgetary process every 2 years rather than every single year. Nothing would stop a supplemental appropriation meeting or all the other things that are allowed under the county delegation if something comes up in the budget process. So all of that still is in place. It just strictly moves to a 2-year cycle instead of an annual cycle. That's it.
Thank you, Senator Lang.
I'm sorry, one more thing.
Yes.
And I will tell you, I worked with Kate over there at with the New Hampshire County Association. They're okay with this bill. They helped me provide language for it.
Are you able to take questions?
I am.
Questions for Senator Lang. Representative Stavis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification. In your testimony, you said on a majority of county commissioners, but the bill says county voters.
So there's 2 places. So again, if you look on section 1, is upon affirmative vote of the majority of county voters, county may move to a biennial budget. But if you look in section 2, putting the question on the ballot shall require a vote in the affirmative by a majority of the county commissioners. So the commissioners put it on the ballot, vote to put it on the ballot, then the voters vote on what's on the ballot.
Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. Regarding putting it on November, when we typically vote just on people and, candidates and things like that, why not a March or a vote where people are used to talking about budgets, talking about different articles and things?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So again, the issue is that not every town follows the town. Like in my town, we've had 2 different voting times. We did it in March, then we decided to move it to May, which is allowed under law. Then we moved it back to March because nobody was showing up in May. And March, we got more people to vote. And so the idea behind November is more people get to vote on the process. You have your people on there, which is your county attorney and your county administrator, your sheriff and county attorney and all of those positions, registrar. And so there are some county questions already on the budget in terms of people go. So putting this on there for the purpose of making sure all the county voters, because everybody in the county votes in November, but not everybody votes in March. Some vote in May, some vote in October and November, based on whether it's a city or a town or an SB2 town. And so a lot of different ways that works.
Further questions? Representative Walker is recognized.
How would this affect like the capital budget for our county? I mean, some capital items they don't think of until the need comes or a replacement building or a replacement vehicle or whatever. So if you've got a 2-year budget, you're kind of locked out. If you go year by year, it's not a big deal. But if you've got a 2-year biennium budget, you could be locked out until the next time you do another biennium to do a certain capital item.
Thank you for the question. So
How would
again,
that affect that?
having served on several capital improvement committees, whether school board or towns and counties have similar. In some cases, they have a capital improvements committee that keeps track of the capital expenditures and what's recommended for the budget and cycle. But again, nothing in this would stop a supplemental budget. So again, you could have a county commissioners turn around and say, the roof just collapsed. We got to appropriate money to be able to fix the roof in a given building that was unbudgeted and unplanned. They would do a supplemental appropriation process for that. And that still would exist.
Follow up?
Yes, follow up?
Well, supplementals, how would that affect the tax rate of certain cities within your county? If you're doing supplementals, it's kind of a delayed reaction, so it might not get enough funds to fund that capital item.
So thank you for the question. So again, there's already a process in place for dealing with the revisement of the of your tax rates for supplemental appropriations. When I was on Belknap County, we had to do a supplemental hearing and deal with some expenditures that we didn't anticipate that ended up adjusting the tax rate later on. So they could still do that, doesn't change that. They would still follow that same process of supplemental appropriation and adjustment of the tax rates with DRA.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative, I can't remember.
France.
Franz, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator. This is an enabling bill. What happened? Is there a way to get out of this if they voted in a 2-year biennial and you didn't want it
So
anymore?
I don't remember if I put that in there or not. So I actually don't have an undo in here, so rescinding this choice. So again, be happy if the committee wanted to put that in there. I wouldn't object to that if you wanted to put that on again on a majority vote. That of the commissioners, the question go on to rescind the choice if you want, just use the exact inverse of the process.
Further questions? Representative Grund.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for my second question. So regarding the supplemental budgets, so I can imagine this happening all the time. Healthcare rates change, and they've been changing significantly the past few years, that and unexpectedly, right? All of a sudden, you think you have a 10%, they come up with an 18% or more. You're changing utilities, changing maybe how your jail personnel, or I can imagine a lot of reasons for a supplemental budget. Is there any concern over what all these little one-offs adding up to the point that they're doing a yearly budget anyway?
So thank you for the question. So again, we do it with the state budget and multi-billion-dollar budget, way more employees than counties have. And so if my opinion is if we're able to figure it out, and the same people are figuring out the state budget, the people figuring out the county budget, they should be able to do that with the county budget as well.
Further questions? I have a couple of questions and I'll do rapid fire.
Sure, go ahead.
So when I first analyzed this bill, I thought that it was doing A, and now that we have the hearing and then you explain the bill, now I'm feeling like I didn't understand the bill coming into this hearing. So the first question is the purpose of the bill is it to allow counties to change to biennial budgets? Because based on my research currently, 2 out of the 10 counties already do have a biennial budget. And my interpretation of the bill is to align those off, to shift it off from the state budget cycle. That's what I thought the purpose of the bill was. Is that incorrect? You're just, the bill's purpose is to provide a mechanism by which counties can choose to adopt, instead of an annual budget, a biennial budget.
Right,
Is that
it's a
correct?
process bill, enabling process bill that allow counties that are currently on annual budgets to be able to go to biennial budgets and to set those biennial budgets in the off year of the state budget for workload purposes.
Okay. So can you confirm based on my research? I have Rockingham and Stratford currently now have already adopted biennial budgets. I guess I'll direct that question to
She's filling our
the-
pink card as we speak.
the Association of Counties. So we'll pass on that. And then the second question that I had is I do see that it's enabling legislation, and then the question to switch to this biennial budget will go before the voters. That upholds the idea of local control. However, the question that I'm wondering about is why did you choose that instead of having the question go before the delegation for a vote? Because my question would be, if this question to switch from an annual budget to a biennial budget goes on that November ballot for, my understanding is the citizens of the county to weigh in on that, do they really understand the ins and the outs of the budget cycles and really what's going on, the nitty gritty? I'm wondering perhaps would this question to adopt be better poised to the county delegation, which is the state representatives?
So I'd
What's your
never make the
thought?
motion that our voters are not smart enough because they all voted us in. So, so I don't know that I'd make that determination. But again, I think that voters are very, especially in New Hampshire, heavily engaged in the process across the board. You look at the number of volunteers we have that serve on, I just heard you, zoning boards, as a former zoning board chair, planning boards, budget committees, town budget committees, school boards, right? Never mind the conservation committees and all the other things. To say a voter wouldn't be able to understand what the implication of going from a 1-year to 2-year budget, I think they can well enough understand what the difference is between 1 and 2.
To be clear, I didn't mean to make a comment about what you just said about the voter. It was more of a process. If you're not in the position of a state rep and you're participating in you know all the details. Yeah.
So
I'll
I
just
guess
leave it
my
at that.
statement is
I
that
understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
choice was to have it go to the voters, and that's fair enough. Just thought I'd pose, to understand your reasoning.
Sure.
That's just a preference. You'd
So the way
rather
I
have the
looked at it
voters do
was the
that.
reason why we have a September 1st deadline on here is, again, it's to give time for community discussion. If on September 1, the county commissioners, before September 1, the county commissioners vote to put this on the budget, then every state representative has time to put letters to the editor in, to educate voters on the process of why it's a good idea or a bad idea, but they can make that they can do that within their local community, given the nature of it. So it's why I made it so that there's a public hearing prior to September 1st, so they could show up and testify for that, and then made it so that at least we have 2 months in advance where you have time to be able to communicate with your voters as well. If you think it's a bad idea, you have time to use, whether it's social media or newspapers or anything else, to be able to get your opinion out as well.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
I think there was another card. It hasn't made its way to my hand. So at this time, the chair will recognize Ms. Horgan from the New Hampshire Association of Counties.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. The association does not have a position on this bill, but we did want to make sure that someone was available to answer questions. So Chairwoman Power, the question about who is on biennial budgets and who's on annual budgets, all 10 counties are on annual budgets right now. I think what you may have found for Rockingham is they switched from a calendar year to a fiscal year at one point. So they had an 18-month budget for 1 year while they did that transition. I believe that is what you may have seen in statute previously. But all counties are on annual budgets right now.
Thank you for that clarification.
And happy to take any other questions. if
Further
there are any.
questions? Representative Karazinski is recognized.
Thank you for taking this question. To that end, would it benefit all the counties to go to a fiscal year, a July to June budget to help with taxes and things that they wait until the end of the year to get?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I think our attitude from the Association of Counties is if you give us something to do, we will find 10, sometimes 11 different ways to do it. And doing it the best way for each county and what fits each county is what we like to support and promote. So if some counties find it easier to be on a calendar year, there are 4 that are on a calendar year, and the other 6 are on a fiscal year. That works better for them, and we allow them to, we've supported any changes that anyone wanted to make, whether going to a calendar year or a fiscal year.
Further questions? Seeing none,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So that represents my last pink card. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak to this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Remote testimony for this bill shows 1 in support and 0 opposed. And the in the room blue sheet has no entries.
Thank you. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 653. At this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 495, increasing the limit for transfers of appropriations in Carroll County. Chair recognizes the prime sponsor, Senator McConkey, to introduce his bill to us today. Good afternoon. I apologize for the delay in schedule.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No need to be worried about that with myself. Thank you. Esteemed members of municipal and county government, I'm about to put you back on schedule. In my 20 years, whether it was the House or the Senate, I've never stood before or sat before a group and asked, for the record, I'm Mark McConkey. I represent the good people of Senate District 3, Lakes and Mountains. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 495, increasing the limit of transfers of appropriations in Carroll County, and I am asking you to ITL this bill. If I could just speak briefly to it, we had a real budgetary issue in Carroll County a number of years ago with audits not being done in proper time and accounted properly. The delegation took a step a number of years ago through legislation to limit the amount of appropriation the commissioners could transfer and had made that limit down to $1,000. The county is doing much better. The commissioners had thought to move from $1,000 to $10,000, but at this time they've asked me to withdraw that legislation, and I'm asking you to ITL my bill.
Thank you. Are you willing to take questions? I just really
Reluctantly,
should-
yes.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the only pink card that I have for this bill, and I'll ask, is there anybody present who wishes to speak to this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets. Oh.
I closed the window. Okay. The in the room blue sheet is empty, and I used my window for something else. Here we go. Waiting for my computer to get to the right page. It went too fast for me to get there. It's not. Thank you. All the way down to the Senate bills. In remote testimony, we have 2 in support and 0 opposed.
Thank you. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 495.
Sure.
Yeah. And at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 585 FN relative to audits for communications districts. The chair recognizes the prime sponsor, Senator McConkey, to introduce his bill to us today.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I would ask for a couple moments of your time on this one. For the record, Mark McConkey, I represent the good people of Senate District 3, and I'm here today to introduce Senate Bill 585 relative to audits for communication districts. This bill is a provision of RSA RSA 530. Should have brought my glasses. G10 to allow communication districts to petition the Department of Revenue for exemption from annual audit requirements. Specifically, this bill allows the exemption of an outside audit requirement for any year when the annual revenues of communication district do not exceed $50,000 or when annual revenues are less than $2 million and the district has no authority to raise money from taxation. I'm speaking of the Carroll County Communication District is spending more on conducting annual outside audits than it spends on their costs combined. As shown in the Carroll County Communications District 2025 annual report, includes expenses of $6,028, $3,500, of which was to pay for an outside audit. Without the amendment, the communication district will spend $3,500 to audit $2,500 in cost. The sponsors of this thought, and I believe that that is absurd. The bill will alleviate this wasteful and unnecessary spending. An outside audit is unnecessary when so little money is being spent. Not having an extreme amount of knowledge on this issue, I am joined by Albany Selectman Hilliard behind me, who is a member to the district and was one of the founding members of starting this very beneficial communication district for us. And I would ask for those questions to be followed to my selectmen. But I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Other questions for Senator McConkey? No, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Hilliard. Good afternoon, sir, and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
New to this. My name is Rick Highland. I am a selectman in Albany, New Hampshire. I'm also the Albany representative to the Carroll County Communications District. And I am here to support this legislation on behalf of the Carroll County Communications District. The district was formed under 53G, not as a internet service provider as such, but more as a district that would work with our current ISPs, which are internet service providers, to help facilitate bringing good, fast broadband service to Carroll County. We represent 16 towns in Carroll County, and I am happy to say at this point, approximately 99% of Carroll County has some access to high-speed internet at this time. We are still working with our ISP providers with regard to the BEAD program, which is the federal program to reach the far-out people with some better service or a little competition type of thing. But we've been very successful. We are turning our district around, and we are now working with our local libraries to provide education to mostly middle-aged and old people like me that don't know a lot about the internet. And getting down to the root of the matter, as Senator McConkey stated, we spend a lot of money because the district is technically a municipality and we're subject to the municipal audit. And only certain accountants are certified to do that. Consequently, they spend a lot of money being certified, and it costs us a lot of money as a result. Last year, we tried to go to the Revenue Administration to see if we could get around that, and they said they didn't have the authority to do it without legislation from you folks. So this year, we submitted the legislation with Senator McConkey and asking for your support and allowing us to have an exception to the municipal audit. I'm a fiscal conservative, and we've worded it so that there is still oversight. And I have submitted written testimony. I didn't think I was going to be able to be here today, but the snowflakes all aligned, and here I am. So with that, I would take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Highland? That's what I thought I was reading on here, but I may have misheard your
You're not
name
the
pronounced.
first.
So I apologize for that mispronunciation. Representative Colby is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Thank you also for your service on the select board. I too am a select board member in my community, and that is probably why I am struggling to understand, as a fellow fiscal conservative, why there should be a waiver of accountability on revenues when we're talking about over $1 million. I understand if we're talking about the cost of an audit outweighing, the actual revenues, but this figure goes up to $2 million.
Well, we tried to parallel what the requirements are for a nonprofit, and that's what it is for a nonprofit. If you want to change that, I don't think we'll ever hit that.
Great, thank you.
I mean, currently, we operate strictly on donations and grants. And if you've tried to apply for grants for operational expenses, they're hard to come by. So, I mean, if you think that's too high, I have no problem. You can lower it right down. We have 4 checks we write out every year, and the person that does our audit is making out like a bandit. And I'd rather put it toward education and helping people understand the problems with the internet, security of the internet, and just how to operate it.
Thank you so much.
Additional questions? Representative Grund is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Highland, for taking my question. I'm an auditor by my prior life.
You looking
So,
for work?
so when I see waiving audits, it does make me nervous. So you're saying there's a revenue limit. $2 million does feel high, even if with grant money that's given, having accountability about how it's being used. What's the, and maybe this is more personal than I need, but what's the balance of the money that's sitting in one of these accounts right now?
Right now, it's a guess.
Yeah.
My guess right now, we have about $7,000
Okay.
in our budget right now.
Okay. So if you do take a grant in or anything, you're getting up to $1 million. I mean, that's significant and probably does require an audit. So I would rather see.
I have no problem with that. We just tried to parallel the nonprofit.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. But I'm sure we'll have further discussion. Thank you.
Further questions? I had a quick question, and it has to do with these thresholds. So to be clear, who did the drafters and the co-sponsors of this bill, do you know who they consulted with? I heard you say that the $2 million was based on a nonprofit criteria, but who was consulted to come up with these, the language and the different thresholds? Was the DRA consulted, or were there accountants or auditors that?
Members of our board of
Okay.
various qualifications, we researched it, and that's what we came up with. Like I said, if you want to lower that down to $100,000 or $50,000, that's not an issue. I don't think would affect us. We are a non-taxing entity, so, I mean, it's not going to affect property taxes or anything like that.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. And that represents my last pink card for this bill. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak to this bill who has not yet had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, the chair will recognize Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The remote testimony shows 4 in support and 1 opposed. And the blue sheet in the room is blank. Thank you.
Do I have a pink card from Senator McConkey for? I'm not sure if I do, but we'll sort that out. Oh. Okay, so with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 585 FN. At this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 440 relative to the adoption of energy efficient and clean energy districts by municipalities. And the chair recognizes the prime sponsor, Senator Innes. Good afternoon. Welcome to municipal and county government. And I apologize for being behind schedule.
Perfectly fine. I understand. We ran commerce behind schedule in the Senate today. It's that time of the year. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Senator Dan Innes from Senate District 7. Beautiful Bradford, New Hampshire is my home, and I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 440. Last year, the legislature passed SB 4 that helped to streamline a funding process, also known as CPACER, to enable more construction of commercial and multifamily housing developments. With its passage, however, municipalities were only given the ability to adopt CPACER through the annual town meeting process. As amended by the Senate, the bill would enable municipalities to adopt CPACER through an opt-in select board hearing rather than a once-per-year town meeting. Obviously, a once-per-year town meeting could slow down the development process, and this helps to expedite that just a little bit. It would also clarify public notice requirements, as well as a procedure for municipality to opt out of CPACER if they would like to. I'd like to thank both James Key Wallace from the Business Finance Authority and Brody DeShay from the Municipal Association for their collaboration on this bill. They're both behind me, and as I understand it, are going to speak to this and can certainly address many of the details that are included, but I'm also happy to take any general questions you may have.
Thank you, Senator Innes. Are there questions for the prime sponsor?
All right.
Oh, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
That was easy.
It was.
So at this time, the chair recognizes Mr. DeShays.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon to the committee. For the record, Brody DeShays, I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. I put on my pink card. My testimony would be 1 minute. I'll make it even shorter. I worked with BFA's legal counsel to help draft the current language in front of you. It's supported by our association, BFA, and I think the senator's description is very overarching and generally effectively what the bill intends to do. I'd be happy to answer, though, any further technical questions on the language in front of you, should you have it. Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. DeShays? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
And next, the chair recognizes Mr., is it Wallace? Or
Key Wallace.
Key Wallace?
Yeah, it's a hyphenated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Good afternoon and welcome to Municipal and County Government.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee. For the record, James Key Wallace, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority. The Senator's introduction covered the bases. I think, like Brody DeShay's testimony before, we all work together. This bill seems to work for all the parties involved. It's an optional bill for towns that want to adopt CPACER this way. They can still do it by town meeting if they so choose. So it doesn't change. It just gives them an additional option. I'm happy to answer any questions and recognize that there may not be any, and I'm not offended either way.
Questions for Mr. Key Wallace? So I have a question. I was taking notes, but just to be clear, I think that I heard is that this bill gives the authority of the select board to establish this CPACER district. So the question first goes before the legislative body, if there is one in a town, depending upon the form of government.
Right. Good question, Madam Chair. So the CPACER program is an opt-in program, one town, one city at a time. And the way that opt-in process works depends on your municipal structure. So if you're a city with the city council, that's what you do, right? If you're an unincorporated area, county commissioners, right? If you're a traditional town meeting town, the way it was set up was those towns were stuck to only a one time per year chance to sign up for the program. This bill gives those towns the chance to either still do it that way or have their select board do it in response to a new project that's, looking for funding. It's all private funding in their town.
So just in my mind, to be clear, the question goes before the say for example, in a traditional, I probably should ask him NHMA.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm happy. Yeah.
Do you, and then you can come back.
Sure.
So, Mr. Deshays, did you hear my question and understand it?
I did, yes, and so your question, Madam Chairwoman, and correct me if I'm wrong, is regarding the adoption procedure, does the legislative body need to act force in order to enable the governing body to adopt the provisions of RSA 53-F, which is CPACER? How we have worked on this language with BFA is that it's two-pronged. The governing body can either place the question on the warrant and it be taken up in the usual procedures of the town meeting or of the town meeting, or the governing body can, through the public hearing process that already exists, adopt the provisions of law. However, 25 voters of the municipality within 30 days of when they are in the period before they take the vote after the public hearing can petition to place the question on the warrant. So there's kind of two processes for municipalities to adopt, and there's still an option for members of the legislative body to force the question onto the ballot.
I might be missing something, but just help me to understand. So I guess my question would be based on what I heard you explain is, so this bill doesn't allow the legislative body, say in a traditional town meeting, it does not give them the ability to give that authority to the governing body to enter into this program. It just, by virtue of the bill being enacted, they automatically have that ability to do that. So it's sort of like the inverse. So the law allows the governing body to enter into the agreement, the program, or they can say, we're not going to do that. We're going to go through the process which currently exists, and that would be to put the question on the warrant. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it also, after the public hearing, if the governing body is looking to adopt the provisions of law, there is a mechanism for the legislative body to force that question onto the warrant or onto the ballot, depending on your form of town meeting. I certainly, Madam Chairwoman, hear what you're raising, where you're coming from, the legislative body enabling the governing body is what we had originally, when we talked to stakeholders, NHMA said that's the typical procedures that we would prefer, and senators and stakeholders said no, they want municipalities and their governing bodies to have more flexibility to be able to adopt these provisions of statute without having to go to an annual meeting. There were even discussions about getting rid of the legislative body being involved in any part of the process, and we felt as if crafting this language struck a balance with what other stakeholders wanted to go more that route, allowing only the governing body to have that authority, or some stakeholders even wanted to mandate CPACER across the entire state with no mechanism for municipalities to opt in. It would just be automatic, which we found as deeply problematic. So I hear your concerns, Madam Chairwoman, but I feel as if the stakeholders have done a lot of great work and worked with senators and met the senators and all the stakeholders where they're at and have allowed for as much local flexibility and still oversight from the legislative body while meeting the needs of the CPACER program and what several stakeholders and senators have requested from our associations and others.
With all due respect, it's not clear to me to what degree the co-sponsors of this bill understand municipal governance. So I think that I did hear that NHMA originally supported the idea of that vote by the legislative body, given the authority of the governing body to be able to enter into such an agreement. But that's not, so that was, because like you said, that's how other authorities are transferred. The legislative body, the whole idea of local control, it does go before the legislative body first, and we say, yes, we give the governing body the authority to do, such and such as allowed through the law. And I'm just wondering why this is different.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairwoman. This is different based on, as you know, as part of the legislative process, there's a lot of stakeholders who have a lot of different interests. And what we thought was the best process, so when we first negotiated Senate Bill 4, it was very clear to us that adopting the provisions of RSA 53-F, that it would go in front of the annual meeting, the legislative body, like many different types of programs. And it was discovered by several stakeholders. I guess they weren't fully aware of the fact that they couldn't just ask a select board to adopt provisions of law. And when they had discovered this and that they would have to wait an entire year to be able to adopt the provisions of the updated RSA 53-F, they were taken a little back and they wanted to figure out a way to allow only the governing body to opt into the program. So NHMA worked with them to try to balance them and the senator's requests and desires to allow some flexibility for the governing body to adopt these provisions of law, but also allow some oversight of that by the legislative body to either the governing body can defer to them and still put the question in the, as SB4 was passed, in the original form of adopting these provisions of law, or allow the governing body to partake and start the process, have a public hearing. And if the legislative body, 25 voters, want to force the question onto the warrant, they can still do that. So we tried to think of a hybrid system that would make it so that we weren't going fully to giving all these authorities to the governing body without any say of the legislative body, but still having the current system for adoption to exist, or a system where the governing body can have a hearing and say, this is what we'd like to do and adopt, and for the legislative body to determine, that sounds fine to us, we don't think this needs to go to annual meeting, or to force it to annual meeting. And that seemed to be an approach that all stakeholders could generally agree to.
Further questions? Representative Karazinski is recognized.
Would this be like a non-lapsing townwide approval of the governing body to be able to accept CPACER for the whole town? Or is this like specific to a development?
So thank you for the question, Representative. So whether you adopt it and the legislative body is the one that adopts it in the typical way that they would adopt these types of questions, whether it's on the warrant or the ballot, or if it's done by the governing body after a public hearing with all the notice requirements, which are very much aligned with like the rezoning of a municipality, where you have to, there's a map on that can be placed on display that people can review, a public hearing process, public notice, well in advance in the newspaper circulation or in lieu on the town's website. So after that adoption process happens, there is a process for rescinding, and it can be rescinded by the governing body or by a petition warrant article by the legislative body. So it can be rescinded either way. Now, those pre-existing agreements that were adopted under the CPACER program in coordination with New Hampshire Business Finance Authority, those agreements would continue, right? Because that would be unconstitutional for the municipality to end those private contracts and that financing. But there is a process, and a process where the legislative body can directly petition to either rescind all the existing CPACER districts or even specific CPACER districts, because theoretically, political subdivision that can adopt the provisions of this law can adopt multiple CPACER districts, make their entire town a CPACER district. It really depends on what they feel meets their needs and what's going to meet their development needs, and oftentimes we even align with their master plan. Does that answer your question?
Follow up?
Thank you. Not really. Unless the town or the governing body makes the whole town a CPACER district, could the legislative body rescind a part of it? If there's a development that has it and you can't take it away, but could the town rescind it so that no future development could get CPACER? That's what you said.
Mm-hmm.
My point is, if the governing body got the authority to make the whole town CPACER, then the legislative body couldn't ever take it away.
So thank you for the question. So to clarify, the state would be in SB 440, how RSA 53-F:2 would be newly constituted. The state would be providing the governing body with the authority to adopt CPACER districts through a very specific process, and the legislative body, 25 voters, could petition to still force that question on the warrant or the ballot, depending on your form of town meeting. Now, when it comes to rescinding, the legislative body and the governing body both have that authority to rescind. So even if the governing body is the one who's established and the voters didn't petition it onto the warrant, it goes through and they establish a CPACER district, whether it's the whole town or a singular district, the legislative body can still, through the provisions of RSA 39:3, place a petition warrant article either onto, if you're, official referenda, form of town government on the ballot, or on the warrant of traditional town meeting town, and to ask the question to rescind, whether it's the whole town was made a district or a specific district, they can rescind any specific district and it goes to a popular vote. So there is still the authority of the legislative body, and I specifically wrote that quite carefully in there to make sure that there wouldn't be a lack of ability for the legislative body to have a petition warrant article and to put the vote to the rest of the residents in the town to rescind districts. I felt like that was a very important part of the bill that ensured that the legislative body, if they really found that they didn't like their whole town being a CPACER district or specific areas, that they could rescind those CPACER districts. But again, it wouldn't override those existing financing agreements. Those would still exist until the financing agreements end.
Further questions? Okay, seeing none. I'd like to call Mr. Key-Wallace
Thank you.
back. Thank you, Mr. Deshays. So you're back in the hot seat.
Thank you, Madam
Questions
Chair.
for Mr. Key-Wallace? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that's the last pink card that I have, and I don't see anybody, and I don't think anybody's behind the, did you have a question? No, I don't see anybody. I can't see through the poll, but I don't think there's anybody there. Okay. So the chair will recognize Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The remote testimony has 13 in support and 6 opposed. And the blue sheet in the room has 3 in support.
Thank you, Representative Gilman. And with that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 440. So we have one bill on our lineup here that we will hold a public hearing on. And that's, yes, 435. Yes, that would be great. So at this time, the chair will open the public hearing on Senate Bill 435 relative to the Zoning Board of Adjustment variance criteria. The chair recognizes Representative Walker to introduce the bill to us today.
Yes, my name is Representative Walker from Stratford 19, and I am introducing Senate Bill 435 relative to Zoning Board of Adjustment variance criteria.
Thank you. And at this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Deshays.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon to the committee. For the record, Brody Deshays. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we support Senate Bill 435 as amended by the Senate. Senate Bill 435, while it rewrites the 5th criterion for a variance, it's not meant to change how the 5th criterion for a variance from the terms of a zoning ordinance is applied, usually called the hardship requirement. What the bill effectively restates what already exists in law in a way that is more easily understandable and accessible to applicants and volunteer zoning board of adjustment members, and aligns the new language with existing law and case law. It also effectively renames a requirement an unreasonable restriction, which seems to be more understandable to folks who are applicants or volunteer ZBA members. I think oftentimes when folks hear unnecessary hardship, the first thing they think of is an unnecessary hardship as if a hardship that the applicant may personally have and how they're trying to utilize a building or their property, when the reality is it's an unnecessary hardship due to the specific nature of the lot or the parcel. So I just want to, as a general reminder for the committee, and I pass out a handout that has all 5 criterion for zoning variances. That's a helpful handout that we provide to ZBA members or planning board members or folks who would like it, who are members of our association, and also it has a brief description of the special exception. I think specific to that, though, it has good information on just some notes on the 5th criterion. Sorry, what was that? I passed out, I thought I had 13. They stopped there. Really? Because I printed out 13 for every single. Oh my God. Yeah, there is 18. I will email my written testimony. I will. And my apologies. I don't know why I printed. All right.
Alternatively, we could have the clerk or the committee researcher make some Xerox copies to get to, how many did not get one? 4?
And I
4.
think probably also my testimony on 508 and 439. I can email the committee researcher
Yeah.
and connect with her while you guys eat lunch.
Is
My
this an extra
apologies.
one? Okay, so now there's 3. Okay, you may proceed.
Lapse of judgment on my part. My apologies to the committee. So at any rate, a variance exists as a constitutional safety valve to prevent land use controls from restricting property rights too much. And all land use regulation is a balance between the property rights, property owners, the rights of property owners to use their property, and the need for society to place some controls on the way property is used to prevent harm to others and promote community goals. So the unnecessary hardship criterion is a key component of the variance test. It is a criterion that assures that the permission to deviate from the zoning ordinance is not arbitrarily granted and is justified by connecting the test back to the specific attributes of the property. Senate Bill 435 keeps that key intent of the unnecessary hardship requirement and renames it the unreasonable restriction. The two-part test in the current law is effectively restated on lines 17 through 21, with A aligning with the current first part and B aligning with the current second part. So you see subsection A and B on those lines. Those align with the two-part test that currently exists. I'm not going to go on much. I won't go on any further. If you guys have specific questions, or I should say if you representatives have specific questions about the bill or about the two-part test, I have extensive notes and did fair amount of research, but again, NHMA, we helped craft this at the request of Senator Gray and the Senate Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee. We worked with several land use attorneys to ensure that this language in front of you aligns with existing case law and with the existing statute, but is just rewrited. We did not support the bill as introduced, and I don't think we could support any amendments unless they were deeply vetted by land use attorneys and by our association to ensure that it does align with the current case law, because that's been the key concern that we've heard from stakeholders, is that if the law is changed in a way that doesn't align with existing case law, it will precipitate more lawsuits and more needs for the courts to interpret the law and establish new case law for new interpretations. So we're trying to avoid that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Colby for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Is it an unintended consequence of the legislation to deem that local municipal zoning laws are unreasonable?
Thank you for the question, Representative. So I'm asking, let's see, unreasonable means to resolve it. So thank you for the question, Representative. If I'm not mistaken, that term unreasonable restriction effectively, I hear what you're saying. Zoning ordinances are not unreasonable. However, there can be times and specific circumstances where the literal application of a zoning ordinance could be viewed as an unreasonable restriction on the use of the property based on constitutional tests. The goal of the hardship requirement is, again, to be the key component that determines whether or not there should be permission to deviate from a zoning ordinance because that restriction could be viewed as unreasonable in a way of limiting someone's private property rights, of an illegal taking of property. So we felt as if unreasonable restriction is easier for folks to understand that, okay, this ordinance seems to be, if applied literally, that this is an unreasonable restriction on someone's free use of their property. It's not going to have a negative impact on abutters or others, and it still respects the spirit of the ordinance, where unnecessary hardship, it's a little bit more difficult for folks to understand that. And as I mentioned, it is oftentimes we run into the issue where folks, they apply the unnecessary hardship to someone's personal hardship. They say, I want a staircase because it'd be easier for me to walk into my house or something, and therefore it should be placed into within the buffer zone. When in reality, the hardship you need to be looking at is a hardship due to the fact, the nature of the land, the very being of the land, its topography, geography, shape of the parcel. That's the hardship folks need to be looking at. But when you say unnecessary hardship, people always assume an unnecessary hardship of an individual, not of the specific piece of land that a dwelling or some use is being proposed on. So I hope that answers your question.
Further questions? Representative Gilman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Deshays, for taking my question. Kind of to follow up on Representative Colby's comment, in line 24, it says dimensional limitations or any other requirement of the ordinance. So to me, does that mean that anything in the zoning ordinance cannot be applied to this site?
No, so the definition of unreasonable restriction set forth in subparagraph 1 shall apply whether the provision of the ordinance from which a variance is sought is a restriction on use, a dimensional or other limitation on a permitted use, or any other requirement of the ordinance. That's if someone needs to. An unreasonable restriction could be anything in the zoning ordinance, because you can seek a variance from any zoning ordinance. So it's just clearly specifying that anything in the zoning ordinances could be deemed an unreasonable restriction when someone is seeking a variance and they need to meet those 5 criteria. Now, just because someone is seeking a variance and says, I have an unreasonable restriction on the use of my property, doesn't mean they actually qualify, because they still need to meet this either the 2-part test in A or the second test in B. So they still need to demonstrate that. And again, the hardship requirement, or what would be renamed under this, the unreasonable restriction requirement, is the key component for determining whether or not you should truly be deviating from the zoning ordinance and giving effectively someone some reprieve from the ordinance to respect their private property rights.
Thank you.
Representative Stavis is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I initially didn't have any problem with this bill, but hearing the commentary on the word unreasonable is giving me second thoughts. And I wonder if a better word might be found, like unusual, or, something that doesn't signify intent, as unreasonable seems to do to me.
Thank you for the question, Representative Stavis. And the reason for using the term unreasonable restriction, it was recommended to us by the Senate Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee. So that we chose, I think there were a few different terms, and NHMA, in working with the senators, landed on unreasonable restriction. You could place the term unnecessary hardship there, and it would still apply the same way as the current law. You could place what you just recommended, it wouldn't change it. However, I think the senators had some fealty to this specific term.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Gilman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking another question. This being state law, and we're proposing to amend state law, if it's in conflict with another one, and I'm going to give an example. We had a triangular shaped lot, and which one was the side setback? I don't know, but side setback is 10 feet in my town. But state law says nothing can be built or paved within 25 feet of a cemetery wall. Mm-hmm. Which one of those could that be deemed an unreasonable dimensional requirement, that because it's not in our zoning ordinance, it's state law?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative Gilman. So under this statute, this is just, so RSA 674:33, Roman 1, is under the powers of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to, after someone has applied, to give them a variance so then they can use their property in a way that deviates from the existing zoning ordinances. So the zoning board cannot give people a variance to violate state statute. The state can amend its laws or it can adopt a process to allow people to deviate from the state law and enable that. But this is just applicable to local zoning ordinances in that specific zone. So in the case of a setback, someone might show up and say, I'd like to, place this structure within the setbacks or within the buffer. And if they're proposing to do that, but it violates state law, the answer is going to be no. But if they're seeking to do that and it violates the ordinance, then they might have to, apply for a variance, and they have to meet these 5 criterion after a public hearing that's duly noticed, and the ZBA deliberates, and then the ZBA has to write their decision for each of these specific criterion, put it in writing, submit it, and then it can still be appealed by the abutters or the applicant, whether they approve or deny the variance. It can be appealed to a superior court or the special land use docket.
Thank you.
Further questions? Just I had a clarifying question. So just to be clear, this bill clarifies current RSA because some applicants have found it very confusing. And in addition, it updates RSA to be consistent with findings of court cases, case law. So it's doing 2 things at once, to revise and update in our statute. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Representative. So I would say it's restating the existing law so it aligns in a more clear way with the current law that's easier for applicants and for the ZBA members to understand. And it's aligning with case law, so it's not changed in a way so then existing case law would no longer be applicable, that all existing case law is applicable. So I think the one minor distinction I would make is that it is effectively would be interpreted the same way as the existing law, just easier for a layman to understand.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't see anybody else in the room. So the chair will recognize Representative Gilman to report out the blue sheets.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the remote testimony, there were 3 in support and 0 opposed. And the blue sheet in the room has 1 opposed.
Thank you, Representative Gilman. With that, the chair will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 435. So if I've kept track of all the bills, that concludes our publicly noticed business for today. And I apologize. We did run over, but I think we're still in good shape. And anybody have any questions? No. So with that, that would conclude our business for today, and the chair adjourns this meeting.